Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku was transported to the real world? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Chapter 1. Day in the Life. A typical day in the life of a high school teacher consists of a repeated schedule that almost never wavers. 6 a.m. Wake up and get ready. 7. Drive to work with a freshly brewed coffee. 7:20. Arrive and meditate to prepare for the mental warfare. 7:30. Set up the classroom and prepare for the first lesson. 7:50. Finish a lukewarm cup of coffee. 8 o'clock Savages. Students arrive. 9:30 First lesson ends, planning PRD begins. 10:30 Second lesson begins. 10:35 Student riot of 67s. 12:00 Second lesson ends, lunch PRD begins. 12:30 Lunch ends, third lesson begins. 1:30 Third lesson ends, student study hall begins. 2:30 Final lesson begins. Students destroy all hope in future generations. 3 o'clock Final lesson ends. Students leave. 3:05 Grade papers. 4:00 Go home. Every day for Izuku was the same. A perfect 8-hour workday, with no surprises and no inconsistencies. Some say this kind of same old job gets boring within the first month, and Izuku Midoriya would usually agree. But, well, let's just say it's not exactly a same old type of job. Sparks flew past Izuku's head, hot bits of ash still red with energy landed in his green hair. Putting his signature notebook under his arm, he quickly brushed out the debris, afraid the embers would light his uncombed hair. He watched as explosions filled the air, creating most likely permanent burn marks on the ceiling. Izuku rolled his eyes, smirking discreetly. Take it easy, Dynamite, or the janitorial staff will yell at me again. Bakugo's energized laugh cut through the rising chaos, as a powerful beam of water shot past his face. Too bad, Teach. If you ask me to fight these little wannabes, then I won't hold back. Izuku shook his head, laughing quietly. Remembering the looks his students gave him as pro-hero Dynamite walked into the training gym was priceless. You could almost see the terror in their eyes as he explained they would be fighting him. A deafening crack echoed through the gym as Dynamite propelled himself toward the ceiling, spinning like a top. Stop thinking and move, he roared, noticing a group of students gathering in a circle below. You're not a statue, you're a target. If you're gonna fail, fail at full speed. He corrected his flight path with a sharp pop of his left palm, putting him directly in the path of a student's projectile. It sailed past him, missing by a mile. Bakugo didn't even look back as he cackled. Is your quirk bad aim? Because you're a natural at it. Adjust for the wind next time, moron. Down on the floor, Koda gritted his teeth, sending a concentrated jet of water upward to intercept the pro-hero. Bakugo slammed his hands together, the sheer heat of his palms turning the water into a thick, blinding fog that blanketed the arena. Hey, water boy. That's the best you got. Bakugo's voice boomed from within the white mist. I've seen better pressure from a leaky garden hose. Aim for the eyes or don't aim at all. The class scrambled backward, their eyes wide as they felt the scorching heat of Dynamite's presence. Realizing the students' hesitancy, he used his blasts to jump high above them. Bakugo hung in the air for a split second, his palms crackling with blinding flashes of light that forced the students to squint. Sensing an opening, a brown-haired boy named Akira lunged forward, ducking beneath a swing and grazing the edge of Bakugo's heavy grenade gauntlet. In an instant, the pro-hero's body was slammed toward the gym floor, dragged down by an artificial gravity that should have pinned him. But Bakugo didn't fight the weight. Instead, he twisted his torso, using the sudden momentum to spin like a jagged wrecking ball. With a thunderous roar from his palms, he ignited a massive blast that propelled his weighted body directly into the center of the student formation. They went down like bowling pins, a mess of tangled limbs and groans. Bakugo's energized laugh filled the rafters as he landed in a crouch. If you're gonna make me heavy, Make sure I can't move my arms, moron. You just turned me into a human meteor. Above the carnage, the only sound was the frantic scratching of a pencil. Akira Satoshi, Izuku muttered, his eyes never leaving the field as he scribbled. Quirk, weight shift. Incredible potential for grounding opponents, but he's too eager to act. He focuses on the touch, not the trajectory. With a practiced flick of his wrist, Izuku circled a note at the bottom of the page in bold, heavy lines. Work on battle sense, anticipate the counter. Pro-hero Uravity could be of use. Before the dust from Akira's failure could even settle, a pink-skinned girl with tufts of spiky red hair lunged through the haze. My turn, Uncle Katsuki. Emi Kirishima yelled, her arms shimmering as a translucent, violet sludge coated her skin and instantly calcified into jagged, obsidian-like plates. She didn't just run, she skated across the gym floor on a layer of unhardened acid, her eyes locked on the pro-hero. Using her momentum, she launched herself into the air, aiming a reinforced, crystalline kick at Bakugo's ribs. Bakugo's eyes widened with a predatory glint. He spun on his heel, his palm meeting her armored shin with a controlled, high-frequency blast. The impact didn't just knock her back. It sent hairline fractures spiderwebbing through her violet plating. Uncle? Sir, on the clock, kid? Bakugo barked, his grin widening as the smoke cleared. And quit relying on that shell. If it's hard, it can shatter. You're getting stiff. You've got your old man's thick head, but your mom's mobility. Use both or don't bother coming at me. In the outskirts of the battle, the only sound was the frantic scratching of a pencil. Emi Kirishima, Izuku muttered, his eyes never leaving the field. Quirk, corrosive armor. She's inherited Ijiro's spirit and Ishido's versatility, but she's treating her hardening like a shield instead of a weapon. He circled a note at the bottom of the page in bold, heavy lines. Needs to learn to shed and regrow armor mid-maneuver to absorb shock. He glanced up, a small smile tugging at his lips. She's got her mother's temper, he whispered. Kakin is going to have his hands full. As Emi skidded across the floor, her violet armor flaking off like broken glass, Kota Izumi decided he'd seen enough of his classmates hitting the dirt. He didn't just fire a spray this time. He planted his feet, his face contorting with the same stubborn determination Izuku used to wear in the face of certain defeat. Get back! Kota roared, and the air in the gym suddenly turned damp. Instead of a thin stream, he unleashed two massive, spiraling torrents of water from his palms, aiming them not at Bakugo, but at the floor and ceiling simultaneously to create a crushing hydrovice. Bakugo's eyes lit up not with anger, but with a genuine, savage delight. Finally, a bit of pressure, he yelled, his voice straining against the roar of the water. He didn't dodge. He slammed his palms together, letting off a concentrated, white-hot burst that turned the gym into a literal sauna in seconds. The vice evaporated into a blinding fog, and before Kota could blink, Bakugo was behind him, a hand hovering inches from the boy's damp collar. Rule 1. Don't give your opponent a smokescreen. Rule 2. You're all dead. Bakugo's laugh echoed through the steam, loud and jagged. He gave Kota a playful, albeit heavy, shove toward the other groaning students. Nice try, Waterboy. You actually made me sweat. Too bad that just gives me more fuel. Izuku watched the steam begin to clear, his pen hovering over the final lines of the page. Kota Izumi. Quirk, Hydrojet. He's finally learned to manipulate the environment, not just the target. He's thinking 3 steps ahead. Izuku smiled, closing the notebook with a soft thud. But Kakin is still 10 steps ahead of everyone. Izuku raised his hand, walking over to the exhausted students. Okay, students, that's enough for today. Good work. Dynamite's laughter died down into a sharp, focused grin as he looked over the group of panting, sweat-streaked teenagers. He stood with his hands on his hips, his grenade gauntlets still radiating heat. Listen up, extras, he barked, though the edge in his voice was more authoritative than angry. You all have quirks that can hit hard. That's easy. Any idiot can swing a sledgehammer. But you're fighting like you expect me to just stand there and take it. He pointed a gloved finger at Akira, who was still rubbing his sore shoulder. You wait shift. Stop waiting for the perfect touch. If you can't get close enough to pin me, change the weight of the floor or the debris around me. Make the environment work for you, not against you. Then, his gaze shifted to Emi, his expression softening just a fraction. And Kirishima? You've got your mom's speed, but you're using that armor like a shell. A shell is just a coffin if the guy hitting it is stronger than you. You need to learn to flash harden, don't keep the armor on the whole time. Shed it, move, and regrow it exactly where the impact is gonna land. It'll save your stamina and keep you from getting stiff. Finally, he looked at Koda, who was soaking wet and breathing hard. Bakugo didn't offer a hand up, but he gave a sharp nod of respect. Water boy, you had the right idea with the steam. But don't just create a distraction, use it to reposition. You stood still once the mist hit. In a real fight, if you can't see the villain is already behind you. He turned back to Izuku, punching his palm with a small, smoky pop. They've got spirit, Aizu. But spirit don't mean squat if they don't use their brains. Tell 'em to hit the showers before they stink up your whole gym. Izuku laughed, play punching his arm in retaliation. You're 100% correct, Dynamite. The students began to filter out to the locker rooms. Bakugo turned to his friend. How about a spar, sensei? Those kids were nothing more than a warm-up. Izuku laughed while checking his watch. Well, I can't right now, but I can after school gets out. Think you can stick around until then, Kaken? It's only one more PRD. The pro nodded, walking toward the corner to grab his gear. He pulled a cold bottle of water from his bag, the condensation slicking his palms. Emi is getting strong, he muttered, his voice dropping the Dynamite persona for a moment of genuine honesty. Kiri and Mina must be proud. Little Koda is doing well, too, probably the most promising extra in the whole batch. You're right, Izuku said, watching the last of the students disappear into the hallway. It feels like only yesterday I was saving him from muscular. Now he's the same age I was when we met. Izuku's face suddenly went pale, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and realization. Wait, Kaken, am I old? Does this mean we're the old heroes now? Bakugo let out a bark of laughter, throwing his head back so hard his spiky hair brushed his shoulders. No, you DMN nerd. You're only 35. Stop overthinking and get to class before you're late for your own lesson. The sound of the final bell echoed through the halls, a distant chime that signaled the end of Deku the teacher and the return of Deku the hero. Izuku adjusted his tie, feeling the familiar hum of one for all beneath his skin. The gym was quiet now, the scent of Emi's acid and Koda's salt water settling into the floorboards, but the air still felt charged. Across the mats, Bakugo was already stretching, his orange hero suit glowing under the industrial LED lights. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. The look in his eyes said it all, school's out. Now, let's see if you've still got it. The setting sun cast long, amber shadows through the windows of UA High, turning the empty hallways into a gold-plated maze. Most students had already retreated to the comforts of the Heights Alliance dorms, but a lingering group, Koda, Emi, and Akira, found themselves pausing near the heavy double doors of Gym Gamma. They were supposed to be heading to dinner, but a low, rhythmic thrum was vibrating through the floorboards, a sound like a heartbeat made of thunder. Do you hear that? Emi whispered, her violet skin glowing in the twilight. She pressed an ear to the metal door. It sounds like a jet engine in there. Koda didn't wait for an answer. He reached out, slowly prying one of the heavy doors open just a few inches. A blast of hot air and the sharp, stinging scent of burnt sugar hit them instantly as they moved to the observation deck above the heroes. Down on the gym floor, the teachers were gone. In their place stood the two pillars of the hero world. Izuku had discarded his suit jacket and tie, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows to reveal the lightning-scarred skin of his forearms. Across from him, Bakugo stood in a low, predatory crouch, his palms beginning to glow with a steady, orange heat that made the air around him shimmer and warp. 5 minutes, Aizu, Bakugo's voice echoed through the rafters, devoid of his usual mocking bite. It was a tone of pure, professional focus. If you can't touch the bell on the far wall by then, you're buying dinner. Izuku shifted his weight, and green sparks began to dance across his skin, his eyes glowing with the emerald intensity of one for all. Make it 3 minutes, Kaken. I've got lesson plans to finish. In a sudden, violent blur of motion, the gym floor seemed to vanish. The students didn't see them move, they only saw the results. 1 second, the two men were standing still. The next, a thunderous boom shook the foundation of the building. A ring of white vapor exploded from the center of the gym as Bakugo broke the sound barrier, his body a golden streak of light. He met Izuku midair, his palm erupting in a cluster blast that looked like a collapsing star. Did they just? Akira started, but the rest of his sentence was swallowed by the roar of the wind. Izuku didn't pull back. Using Black Whip like a set of extra limbs, he lashed out at the surrounding support beams, swinging his body in a tight, kinetic arc that defied gravity. He spun through the heart of Bakugo's explosion, his boots glowing with green energy. Vanishing point, Manchester Smash. Izuku called out. He didn't just kick, he descended like a falling mountain. Bakugo cackled, a wild, sharp sound that pierced through the noise. He flipped backward in midair, using the recoil of a massive explosion from his feet to propel himself upward. He caught Izuku's heel with his forearm, the impact creating a shockwave that sent a ripple through the gym's reinforced glass windows. Too slow, sensei. Bakugo's voice was a jagged edge of excitement. He grabbed Izuku's ankle, his palms beginning to hiss with concentrated smoke. I want you to treat me to some udon once I kick your butt. With a violent twist, Bakugo used a point-blank turbo blast to fling Izuku toward the far wall. But Izuku didn't hit the bricks. He flipped, his gloves scraping the surface for a fraction of a second before he used FA Gene to launch himself back like a bullet from a gun. The two collided again in the center of the room, their fists meeting with a crack that sounded like a lightning strike. The sheer pressure of the air pushed the hidden students back from the railing, their hair whipped wildly by the artificial gale. Koda gripped the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. He had seen Brother Midoriya fight villains, but this was different. This wasn't a struggle for survival, it was a conversation. Down below, the two men moved in a blur of green electricity and orange fire. There were no wasted movements, no hesitation. Look at the floor, Emi whispered, her voice trembling with admiration. Koda looked. Every time Bakugo landed, the reinforced concrete cracked. Every time Midoriya pivoted, the air itself seemed to scream. They weren't just using their quirks, they were bending the laws of physics to their will. It made their earlier training session look like a playground game. To the students, this wasn't a spar, it was a glimpse into a world they weren't yet ready for. Suddenly, the conversation turned into a roar. Izuku lunged, his body glowing with a more intense hue of emerald as he charged FA Gene to its limit. At the same time, Bakugo pulled his arms back, the air around his palms beginning to swirl into a violent, concentrated vortex. Here it comes. Akira gasped, shielding his eyes. The two heroes met in the center of the gym with a vanishing point smash and a howitzer impact combined into one point of contact. They didn't even hit each other, the force of their attacks colliding created a pressurized sphere of blue light that expanded outward like a ripple in a pond. The glass of the observation deck didn't shatter, but the sheer concussive force of the wind slammed into the mezzanine with the weight of a freight train. Whoa! Koda shouted as the railing he was holding vibrated violently. The wind caught Emi's hair and Akira's jacket, literally pulling them forward. The three of them tumbled out from the shadows and onto the lighted ledge of the gallery, stumbling as they tried to keep their balance. Down below, the chaos stopped instantly. The dust was still swirling, and the floor was still smoking, but the two pros were frozen in place. Bakugo was mid-crouch, his palms still sparking, while Midoriya was perched on a black whip line he'd anchored to the ceiling. Slowly both men looked up. The gym was deathly silent for 3 long seconds. Then, Bakugo straightened up, wiped a smudge of soot from his cheek, and let out a huff of smoke. "You three!" Bakugo barked, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Unless you're planning on joining in, get down here before I blast you off that ledge." The walk down the spiral stairs felt like an eternity. By the time the three students reached the gym floor, the air was still thick with the smell of ozone and the dry heat of Bakugo's sweat. Up close, the destruction was even more terrifying. The reinforced floor was scorched in radial patterns, and Izuku's footsteps had left literal indentations in the concrete. Izuku stood there, ruffling his messy green hair and trying to smooth out his scorched shirt. He looked less like a world-class hero and more like the flustered teacher they knew, but the green sparks still flicking occasionally off his skin told a different story. "Sorry, sensei," Akira stammered, his eyes darting to a massive crack in the wall. "We heard the noise and you wanted to see what a real fight looks like," Bakugo finished for him. He wasn't yelling. He was leaning against a support pillar, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked them over, his gaze landing on Kota. "Well, did you learn anything, or were you too busy shaking in your boots?" Kota looked up, his breathing still shallow. I learned that we aren't even playing the same sport as you two." Bakugo let out a short, sharp huff, not quite a laugh, but close. "Demen right, you aren't." "Not yet. But look at Deku." He jerked his chin toward Izuku. 10 years ago, he was a quirkless loser who couldn't throw a punch without breaking his own arm. Now he's the only person on this planet who can keep up with me. Izuku laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Kaken, that's a bit of an exaggeration." "It's the truth." Bakugo snapped, though there was a rare, underlying warmth in his eyes. He looked back at the students. "You want to move like that? Then stop watching and start working. If I catch you slacking in tomorrow's drills, I'm doubling the laps. Now get out of here. It's past curfew." The students scurried toward the exit, their faces lit up with a new kind of fire. Kota paused at the door, looking back one last time. He saw Izuku and Bakugo bump fists, a quiet, tired smile shared between the two rivals. "Good work today, Kota," Izuku called out softly. Kota nodded, a small, determined smile finally breaking through. "See you tomorrow, brother Midoriya. I'll be watching your future fights, Dynamite." The heavy gym doors finally clicked shut, leaving the two men alone in the settling dust. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal rafters and the distant hum of the school's evening security system. Bakugo stood still for a long moment, his head tilted back as he stared at the ceiling. Then, with a long, pained hiss of air through his teeth, he let his shoulders drop. He reached up, slowly unbuckling the heavy leather straps of his remaining gear. "Man it," he muttered, his voice sounding much older than it had 5 minutes ago. He gingerly rotated his right shoulder, a series of audible pops echoing through the quiet gym. "I think I pulled something in my trap during that last cluster." "You're hitting harder than you did last month, nerd." Izuku chuckled, though he was currently damp with sweat. "You're the one who told me to stop holding back, Kaken." Besides, he winced as he straightened up, rubbing his lower back where he'd taken a glancing blow from one of Bakugo's feints. "I'm pretty sure my ribs are going to be purple by tomorrow morning." "You weren't exactly being gentle." Bakugo snorted, kicking his gear bag toward the locker room. "Whatever. I'm starving. If I have to go home and cook, I'm going to blow up my kitchen." He looked over his shoulder, his expression uncharacteristically neutral, the look of a man who was ready to stop being dynamite for the night. "Udon. You're paying." Izuku smiled, the glow of the fight finally fading from his eyes to be replaced by that familiar, warm kindness. He grabbed his yellow backpack and slung it over his shoulder. "I did say I'd buy it if I couldn't touch the wall, didn't I? There's that shop near the station that stays open late. They have the extra spicy broth you like." Bakugo started toward the exit, his walk a bit stiffer than usual. "Better be extra spicy. My joints feel like they've been through a trash compactor." As they walked out into the cool night air, the two pillars of society looked less like legends and more like two friends just trying to make it to dinner. "Hey, Kaken," Izuku said as they reached the school gates. "Yeah. Don't get used to it. Next time, you're the one buying the expensive beef." Bakugo laughed, the sound carrying easily in the quiet night. "I'll keep that in mind, Aizu. I'll keep that in mind." The smell of spicy curry and ginger drifted through the Kirishima household, a scent that usually signaled a night of high-energy stories and laughter. Outside, the streetlights were flickering on, but inside, the living room was bright and loud. Eijiro Kirishima was in the middle of the floor, his sleeves rolled up, reenacting his latest patrol with the same boisterous passion he'd had since his high school days. He was a wall of muscle and kindness, his red hair still defying gravity even after a long shift. But for the first time in her life, Emi wasn't leaning forward in her seat. Her mind was still back in Gym Gamma, replaying the sound of the air shattering. Then your favorite hero Crimson Riot stepped in to save the day with the help of his beautiful wife, pro-hero Pinky. Her father's eyes drifted to his daughter. You aren't listening, are you? Is everything all right? You usually jump at the chance to listen to our battle stories. Emi let out a sigh and turned to her spiky-haired dad. It's just, for class today Uncle Kasuki came in for multi-day combat lessons. Kiri interrupted her, leering back his head in amusement. Oh, that we know what that means. Mina popped her head out of the kitchen. Up. A certain class got one hell of a beating today, and more is coming tomorrow. Emi gave a confused look and continued. Anyways, when we were fighting him we didn't even scratch him, he wasn't breaking a sweat. But then after school ended me and my friends were leaving when we heard huge booms, so we went to check it out and Midoriya-sensei and Uncle Kasuki were sparing. And oh my god, it was just that it was absolutely totally incredible. She stammered, her eyes gleaming with admiration. The ground was shaking and cracking under their feet, and the whole room was vibrating and wind was being blown everywhere. She gestured wildly. I couldn't even see what they were doing. They are on a totally different level. I mean god level. It was amazing, but at the same time I felt conflicted, because how the hell am I ever gonna measure up to that? Her father put a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, Squirt. You'll improve in time. Mina walked out of the kitchen and sat next to her daughter, brushing her hands off as she did. You know, when Izuku was just starting out in the beginning of his first year, he couldn't control his quirk not one bit. Every punch he threw caused a broken arm. He got hurt so often Recovery Girl got him his own medical bed. She joked, poking her elbow into Emi's arm. Really? Every time? Mina slapped her knee. Every gosh dang time. Aizawa-sensei sure was fed up. Kiri patted his daughter's shoulder lovingly. Just give it time. You got this. You are the most manly person I know. As strong as steel and as bright as the sunshine. Emi stood up, the heavy weight that had been sitting in her chest since the gym finally started to lift. She looked at her parents, the man who was as steady as a mountain and the woman who could dance through any danger, and realized they weren't just pros. They were people who had started exactly where she was. Broken arms every time, huh? She mused, a small, mischievous smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. I guess I'm already one step ahead of Midoriya-sensei then. My arms are still in one piece. Kirishima let out a booming laugh, throwing an arm around Mina's waist as they watched their daughter head toward the bathroom. That's the spirit. That's my girl. As the water ran over her hands, Emi looked at her reflection in the mirror. She clenched her fist, watching the violet, obsidian-like scales of her quirk shimmer briefly over her knuckles. She wasn't at god level yet. But as she thought about the way Uncle Katsuki and Midoriya-sensei had bumped fists at the end of their fight, she knew. She didn't have to be. She just had to keep moving forward. Strong as steel, she whispered to herself, the sparkle in her eyes matching the jagged glow of her armor. And bright as the sunshine. Dinner was calling, but for Emi Kirishima, the real work was just beginning. The Spicy Dragon Udon shop was a hole-in-the-wall establishment that smelled perpetually of chili oil and steamed dashi. It was the kind of place where the owner didn't care if you were the #1 hero or a wandering cat, as long as you paid your tab and didn't blow up the furniture. Bakugo slumped over the counter, his face hovering dangerously close to a bowl of broth that was a shade of red usually reserved for hazard warnings. He looked exhausted, his hair slightly deflated from the gym's humidity. You're eating too fast, Kaken, Izuku warned, mid-bite of his own much tamer tempura udon. You're going to get heartburn, and then you'll be even crankier during first PRD tomorrow. Shut up, Deku, Bakugo grunted, slurping a noodle with aggressive intensity. My metabolism is higher than yours. I need the fuel. Besides, if I don't eat this now, I'm going to fall asleep and faceplant into the bowl. Izuku chuckled, reaching for a napkin to wipe a splash of broth from the counter. At least wait for the— I'm serious, Bakugo interrupted, pointing a dripping chopstick at him. If I drown in soup, tell Kirishima I died fighting a giant villain. Don't tell him it was the noodles. Izuku let out a genuine laugh, the kind that always made the lines around his eyes crinkle. Deal. But only if you promise to stop using your quirk to heat up the broth. You're making the chef nervous. Bakugo's hand was wrapped around the ceramic bowl, emitting a faint, steady heat. Whatever. It was getting Luke. Snap. It didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like a single thread of a spiderweb breaking. The old chef, a man who had seen decades of heroes come and go, turned around from the stovetop with a fresh plate of narutomaki. You boys want a refill on them? The chef froze. The two stools were empty. There was no door opening. No flash of light. No whoosh of a portal. 1 millisecond they were there, and the next, the space they occupied was just vacant air. On the counter, Bakugo's chopstick, the one he had been pointing at Izuku, clattered onto the wood, rolling in a slow, lonely circle before stopping. The napkin Izuku had been holding was still fluttering through the air, drifting down to land on a seat that was still warm, but completely unoccupied. Bakugo's bowl was still steaming, the surface of the spicy broth rippling as if the man had just been touching it a heartbeat ago. Izuku's tempura sat half-eaten, a single drop of sauce dripping from a noodle that no longer had a mouth to go into. The chef looked left, then right. He even leaned over the counter to peer at the floor. Hello. The only response was the rhythmic bubbling of the broth pot and the faint chime of the door's bell, swinging back and forth even though no one had walked through it. I didn't even get the money for the extra spice, the chef whispered to the empty room, his hand trembling as he held the plate of fish cakes. They're just gone. The first bell at UA High usually brought a specific kind of chaos. Students hurried to their seats, desks scraped against the floor, and the air was filled with the morning chatter of Class 1A. Kota Izumi sat at his desk, his notebook open and his pencil ready. After watching the spar the night before, he hadn't been able to sleep. He was vibrating with energy, waiting for Midoriya-sensei to walk through the door so he could ask a dozen questions about the vanishing point move he'd seen. But the door didn't open. 5 minutes passed. The chatter died down into a confused hum. Sensei is never late, Emi whispered from the desk behind Kota, her brow furrowed. He's usually here 10 minutes early just to organize his handouts. Maybe he and Uncle Katsuki stayed up too late training? Akira suggested, though he sounded uncertain. 10 minutes turned into 20. The door finally swung open, but it wasn't Midoriya. It was Principal Nizu, perched on the shoulder of a very pale-looking Eraserhead. Aizawa didn't look like he'd slept at all. His eyes were bloodshot, and his capture scarf was wound tighter than usual. The classroom went dead silent. Principal? Aizawa-sensei? Kota stood up, his heart beginning to drum against his ribs. Where's Midoriya-sensei? And Dynamite? Aizawa didn't answer immediately. He looked at the empty podium, then at the students who were looking up at him with expectant faces. He looked like he was searching for the right words that didn't exist. There has been an incident, Nizu said, his high-pitched voice uncharacteristically somber. Last night, Midoriya-kun and Bakugo-kun were spotted at a local restaurant. According to the witness and security footage, they simply ceased to exist. Ceased to exist? Emi repeated, her voice cracking. They died. No, Nizu clarified, though his expression offered little comfort. They didn't fall, and they weren't attacked. They vanished. No quirk signature was detected, no warp gate was opened. One frame they were there, and the next they were gone. The number 1 and number 2 heroes have been declared missing. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kota looked down at his desk. He thought about the fist bump he had seen last night, the strength, the confidence, the sheer permanence of those two men. The school is on lockdown, Aizawa barked, his voice straining to maintain a sense of order. No one leaves the dorms. Pro-heroes from across the country are being summoned. We are going to find them. As the class broke into panicked whispers, Koda stared at the empty chair at the front of the room. He realized with a jolt of terror that the god-level heroes he had admired just hours ago were gone, and for the first time in his life, the world felt very, very small. You know that sensation right before you fall asleep? That sudden, jarring jerk, where your heart skips a beat because your brain thinks you're plummeting through empty space? Imagine that, but 10 times worse. Izuku Midoriya snapped awake, not to the smell of spicy udon, but to the whistling of wind in his ears. He barely had time to register the blue sky before he was slamming into a dumpster. The metal groaned under his weight, and a cloud of discarded cardboard and plastic muffled his cry of pain. What the hell? He groaned, shaking his head to clear the stars from his vision. Instinct took over. He activated float, hovering inches above the grime as he climbed out of the secluded alleyway. He brushed the dust and debris off his white dress shirt, his heart hammering against his ribs. 1 second he was laughing with Kaken. The next, he was in a dumpster. A teleportation quirk? He thought frantically, his analyst brain immediately kicking into gear. But I didn't feel a warp gate. Was it a long-range displacement type? Am I being targeted by a villain? He ran toward the mouth of the alley, expecting to see the towering neon skyscrapers of Muzutafu or perhaps the chaos of a villain attack. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. The city was gone. In its place was a quiet, sun-drenched town. The buildings were low-slung and made of brick or siding, the cars were bulky and lacked the sleek hovertech of home, and the street was lined with neat green lawns and wide, paved sidewalks. Where am I? Did I get moved to a rural prefecture? He scanned the street for a pro-hero. Usually, in a residential area like this, you'd see at least one sidekick on patrol or a low-threat hero directing traffic. But he saw nothing but ordinary civilians in casual clothes. He spotted a blonde woman carrying a heavy load of grocery bags and hurried toward her, hoping she was a local who knew which hero agency handled this jurisdiction. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in Japanese, his voice urgent as he reached out. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but where are we? I seem to be." He trailed off, catching himself. He didn't want to cause a panic if there was a villain nearby. That I seem to be lost. The woman stopped, looking at him with a mix of confusion and mild alarm. "I'm sorry, dear," she said, her accent thick and unfamiliar. "I only speak English. I can't understand what you're saying." English? Izuku's mind whirled. Am I abroad? He took a steadying breath, switching to the English he'd studied for his international hero licensing. "Oh, sorry. I speak English as well. I'm just a little disoriented. I don't know where I am. Can you help me?" The woman's face softened into a warm, neighborly smile. "Of course. You had me worried for a minute. I couldn't quite tell what language that was. Was it Chinese?" Izuku let out a small, nervous laugh. "No, it was Japanese. I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's a pleasure to meet you." He gave a polite, low bow, his heart still racing. "Well, it's nice to meet you too, Izuku. You said you're lost? Well, you're in the heart of good old Leewood, Kansas." Izuku's jaw dropped. The ground felt like it had disappeared beneath his feet all over again. "Kansas?" he repeated, his voice barely a squeak. The United States? America? "Sure is," she chuckled, adjusting the bags in her arms. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" Izuku stood frozen. Kansas. He was on the other side of the planet. No warp quirk in recorded history had that kind of range, not even the ones used by the most dangerous villains of the past. Excuse me," he stammered, his hero instincts screaming at him to find a base of operations. "But do you know where the nearest hero agency is? Or perhaps a police station with a quirk specialist division? I need to report an illegal displacement." The woman blinked, her smile faltering into a look of pure bewilderment. What agency?" "A quirk specialist." She gave a little laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, you must be one of those comic book fans. We don't have anything fancy like that here, honey. Just the local precinct on Tomahawk Creek Parkway." Izuku watched her walk away, his mind spinning. Comic book fans? He clutched his chest, feeling the hum of One for All still vibrating under his skin. Maybe she's just a civilian who doesn't keep up with the news? But to not even know the term hero agency in the United States. The birthplace of heroes? He looked up at the sky, half expecting to see a silhouette of a flying hero like Star and Stripe. But there were only birds and the distant trail of a regular airplane. I need to find Kakin, he thought, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. If I'm here, he has to be nearby. And if this is a villain's trap, we're in a lot more trouble than I thought. Izuku walked through the quiet streets of Leawood, his mind a whirlwind of increasingly desperate theories. A specialized villain quirk that completely masks quirk energy? A hyper-realistic illusion? He needed information: a public library or a newsstand. He had to confirm his location and figure out which hero agency was in charge of this jurisdiction. He finally spotted a brick building with a sign that read Leawood Public Library. Relief washed over him as he pushed open the glass doors. The interior was silent, smelling of old paper and dust. People sat at tables, quietly typing on laptops that looked strangely primitive compared to the holographic tech used at UA. He approached the circulation desk. The librarian, a woman in her 50s, looked up from a stack of books. "Excuse me, ma'am," Izuku began in his carefully practiced English. "Could you direct me to your current events section? I'm looking for information on local hero agencies or recent quirk-related incidents in the area." The librarian's brow furrowed. She stared at him for a long moment, looking for any sign that he was joking. "I'm sorry. Hero agencies?" Izuku felt a prickle of unease. Thinking she might just be out of the loop, he decided to show her his credentials in the most direct way possible. "I'm a pro-hero from Japan. I believe I was illegally displaced by a warp-type quirk." To demonstrate, Izuku clenched his fist. He called forth a mere 1% of One for All. Green sparks of bioelectricity hissed and crackled around his knuckles, casting a flickering emerald light onto the librarian's face. The air in the small radius hummed with raw, kinetic pressure. The librarian didn't just look confused, she recoiled. Her chair screeched against the floor as she pushed herself away from the desk, her eyes widening in genuine, sharp alarm. Her hands began to tremble, and she gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. What is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with a fear that Izuku had only ever seen in the victims of villain attacks. "Is that some kind of hidden pyrotechnics? Are you wearing a device? Sir, you need to turn that off right now or I'm calling the police." Izuku immediately cut the power. The sparks vanished, leaving the lobby in a heavy, awkward silence. He felt a cold pit form in his stomach. Her reaction wasn't that of a civilian used to quirks. She looked at him like he was a monster or a dangerous anomaly. I'm sorry," Izuku stammered, bowing deeply. "I didn't mean to alarm you. I'll use the computers." He hurried to the back of the library, feeling her terrified gaze on his back. He sat at a terminal and frantically began typing. "Search, Top Pro Heroes USA. Results, 0 results found." Showing results for local police departments or Medal of Honor recipients. Search, History of Quirks. Results, Top 10 Best Superpowers in Fiction. Why flight and super strength are impossible in real-world physics. Izuku stared at the screen, a cold, sharp dread lancing through his chest. Impossible? This wasn't just a lack of news coverage. The articles were written with a clinical, absolute certainty that made his skin crawl. They treated his entire existence, the blood, the scars, the legacy of One for All, like a daydream. Realizing the librarian was still watching him, her knuckles white as she gripped a desk phone, her eyes darting toward the door as if praying for a security guard, Izuku stood up. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. He bowed stiffly, a robotic gesture of habit, and hurried out the glass doors. The humid Kansas air hit him, thick with the smell of mown grass and car exhaust, but it felt wrong. It felt hollow. "Focus, Izuku. Think," he commanded himself, his pace quickening as he headed back to the alleyway. "If this is a villain's trap, there's a signature. There's always a signature." He returned to the mouth of the alley. The shadows were longer now, stretching like dark fingers across the asphalt. He knelt by the dumpster, his emerald eyes scanning the ground with the surgical precision of an investigator. Deep in the cracks of the oil-stained pavement sat a faint, shimmering purple dust. It pulsed with a weak, sickly light. He reached out, touching it with a fingertip. It didn't burn. It felt like a static shock that traveled straight to his bone, cold and unnatural, before the grains dissolved into nothingness. Warp residue. But the frequency is all wrong. Suddenly, a jagged spike of danger sense stabbed at the base of his brain. It wasn't a threat. Exactly, it was more like a warning that the world itself was rejecting him. He didn't hesitate. He ignited one for all, the green lightning dancing across his skin as he activated float. He shot upward, a blur of motion, landing silently on the gravel-covered roof of the brick building. He crouched low, his eyes scanning the horizon for a silhouette, a portal, or the flare of a quirk. "Show yourself," he hissed into the wind, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He waited. He stayed in that predatory crouch for hours as the sun bled out over the horizon, turning the Kansas sky the color of a fresh bruise. The attack never came. There were no villains. No portals. Only the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets and the mocking, peaceful glow of streetlights. If a villain did this, Izuku thought, his legs finally shaking from the tension, they aren't coming for me. Just threw me away. He sat back on the roof's edge, checking his pockets. He had his phone still showing a no-service bar that felt like a death sentence, his wallet, and a few thousand Japanese yen. He stood up, the wind whipping his scorched dress shirt. He needed to move. He ignited his power again, launching himself thousands of feet into the air, piercing through the cloud layer where the darkness could swallow him whole. He soared over the flat landscape, a lonely spark in a world of shadows, until he found a currency exchange near a shopping district. The exchange was tense. The teller's eyes kept darting to the strange, glowing intensity in Izuku's gaze, but the yen was authentic. When he tried his credit card at a nearby hotel, the machine let out a sharp, dismissive beep. Declined. My agency's servers don't even exist in the US, he realized, a shiver running down his spine. He paid for a room in cash at a nondescript motel on the edge of the town. He didn't turn on the lights. He simply sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, the only sound being the hum of a cheap air conditioner. He looked at his hands. The green sparks flickered, but in this quiet, empty world, they looked less like the power of a hero and more like a ghost. Tomorrow he will find the hero commission. Tomorrow he will find Kaken. Izuku didn't sleep. He spent the night sitting by the window of the motel, watching the occasional car pass by on the street below. He had tried to reach the Japanese embassy, the local police, and even a random pro-hero fan forum he found online, but every call failed and every search result pointed back to the same thing: fiction. As the sun began to rise over the flat Kansas horizon, a strange sensation washed over him. It wasn't danger, since it was softer, like a magnetic pull in the center of his chest. It wasn't a threat, it was an overwhelming command. Go to 23rd Street. Go to the high school. The urge was undeniable. It felt as if the very air was pushing him in that direction. He showered and put on his cleanest remaining clothes. The white dress shirt was wrinkled and the sleeves were rolled up, but it would have to do. The school was a sprawling complex of red brick and glass. A sign out front read, Blue Valley High School. The moment Izuku stepped through the front doors, the heavy atmosphere of the previous night shifted. A woman in a sharp blazer looked up, her face brightening with immediate recognition. "Oh, thank goodness. You're finally here." Izuku blinked, his hands coming up in a defensive, yet polite, gesture. I'm sorry? Do I know you?" "I'm Mrs. Gable, the vice principal," she said, handing him a lanyard with a plastic ID card. "We were getting worried. The school board said you'd be arriving this morning. Your paperwork was a bit of a mess, but we're just glad to have a replacement for Coach Miller." Izuku looked down at the badge. It had his hero registration photo that read, Mr. Midoriya, Physical Education. Gym teacher? Izuku stammered. "Wait, ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "You're late is what you are," she interrupted, pointing toward the gymnasium. "Your first class starts now." Try to keep them active. The first PRD can be a really troublesome group. Izuku stood in the hallway, clutching the whistle. The world around him was simply rewriting itself to make him fit. He looked at the gymnasium doors, hearing the muffled chatter of teenagers. He took a deep breath. If I can't get home yet, Izuku thought, a familiar spark of determination flickering in his eyes as he straightened his collar, I might as well do what I was trained to do. He pushed the gymnasium doors open. All right, everyone, line up. Let's get started. The students grumbled into a messy line, but the atmosphere changed the moment Izuku stood before them. In the back row, a group of teenage girls immediately stopped their complaining, their eyes widening as they took in the new teacher. Wait, is that the new coach? One whispered, frantically nudging her friend. He's actually gorgeous. Look at those curls. And those arms, her friend replied, stifling a giggle behind her hand. He looks like he actually works out. Why couldn't Coach Miller have retired sooner? Izuku, slightly flushed but professional, cleared his throat. My name is Mr. Midoriya. For our warm-up, 10 laps. Let's go! As the students jogged, Izuku didn't just watch. He ran beside those who were struggling. He noticed one boy trailing far behind, huffing with effort. Instead of shouting, Izuku slowed his pace to a light trot beside him. You're doing great, Izuku said, his voice brimming with that genuine, warm encouragement that had inspired heroes in past years. Just focus on your breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You've got this, don't give up. The boy looked up, surprised by the lack of judgment in his teacher's eyes, and found a second wind. After the laps, he gathered everyone in the center of the gym. Today, we're going to play a game I grew up playing in Japan. It's called Kagabashi, or as translated into English, Shadow Star. He explained the rules. It was a high-speed version of tag played in teams, where you had to tag the opponent's shadow with a soft foam ball while protecting your own. A student in the front row raised his hand. Wait, are you actually from Japan? Do you speak the language? Izuku smiled, and the girls in the front row practically melted. Yes, I am. He spoke a few fluent sentences in Japanese, explaining his hope that they'd all enjoy the lesson. The class fell silent, captivated by the rhythmic flow of the language. But enough about me. Let's get started. The game was a blur of motion. Izuku was careful, agonizingly so. When he threw the foam ball, he moved with a deliberate slowness, ensuring the impact was as soft as a feather. Yet, his precision was undeniable. When a student tripped over their own laces, Izuku was across the gym in a heartbeat, catching the boy before he hit the hardwood. Easy there, Izuku laughed, helping the student stand and patting his shoulder with a kind, steady hand. Are you hurt? Take a breath and get back in there. His precision was terrifying. At one point, a ball flew toward him from the side. Without looking, Izuku tilted his head just enough for it to whistle past his ear, caught a different ball midair, and flicked his wrist. The foam ball sailed across the gym and landed perfectly on an opponent's shadow with a soft thud. Whoa, a boy whispered. He didn't even look at where he was throwing. He's way too fast for a gym teacher, another student remarked, watching as Izuku pivoted on a dime to avoid another tag. Throughout the chaos of the game, one girl remained unnoticed on the bleachers, her nose buried in the yellow spine of a book. She watched the gym with a detached curiosity, but as the lesson went on, she found herself looking up from her pages more and more frequently. Her eyes followed the green-haired man as he pivoted and ducked with a grace that didn't seem to belong in a high school gym. He moved with a strange, liquid efficiency, as if he were aware of every person in the room at once. Whenever a student got too close to a wall or tripped, he was already there, steadying them before they could even lose their balance. She didn't see anything wrong, exactly. She just found him interesting. There was a magnetic quality to the way he carried himself, a mix of intense focus and a kindness that felt far too heavy for a standard Monday morning PE class. She looked down at her book, flipping a page of the manga's final volume, but the story of the fictional boy in the green hero costume couldn't quite hold her attention today. Every time the new teacher laughed or blew his whistle, she felt a strange tug of familiarity, a tiny prickle of curiosity that she couldn't quite place. It was like a word on the tip of her tongue, or a dream she couldn't fully remember upon waking. She glanced at his messy curls one last time as he high-fived a freshman who had finally managed to tag a shadow. She didn't think about her manga. She didn't think about Deku. She just wondered why the new gym teacher looked like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, yet smiled as if he were just happy to be standing in a room full of kids. She closed her book with a soft thud, the yellow spine gleaming in the gym lights. She didn't know why, but she had the sudden, inexplicable feeling that this semester was going to be very different from the last. The rest of the morning was a masterclass in unintentional disruption. By the time the third PRD bell rang, the Midoriya effect had rippled through the entire school. It wasn't just that he was a new face, it was the way he moved through the halls, always offering a polite nod, holding doors open for students burdened with heavy projects, and stopping to pick up dropped pens with reflexes that seemed to anticipate the fall before it even happened. In second PRD, he had managed to turn a group of uncoordinated sophomores into a cohesive unit. He didn't yell or blow his whistle aggressively, he simply stood among them, radiating a quiet confidence that made them want to try. Even the students who usually hid in the locker rooms to avoid participation found themselves caught up in his enthusiasm. By lunch, the hallways were buzzing. Groups of girls huddled by their lockers, scrolling through their phones in a futile search for his name on Instagram or TikTok, while the athletes debated whether he was a former Olympic gymnast or a retired mixed martial artist. The consensus was unanimous. Blue Valley High had never seen a teacher quite like him. Izuku eventually found his way to the faculty lounge. He sat at a small side table, opening a modest container of rice and vegetables he'd bought from the lunch ladies, who seemed particularly fond of him and had piled his plate high. He was trying to keep his head down, but his heightened senses made it impossible to ignore the conversation happening at the large round table across the room. "I'm telling you, the energy in the gym is completely different," Mr. Henderson, the history teacher, said while shaking his head. "I walked by to get some equipment, and he had the freshman class actually cheering while doing running drills." "Who does that?" "He's got a gift," the art teacher, Ms. Clark, added, leaning in. "He's so polite. He bowed to me in the hallway, an actual, formal Japanese bow. It was charming, actually." "It's more than just polite," Mrs. Gable chimed in, stirring her coffee. "He's remarkably attentive. He's already memorized half the students' names. And let's be honest," she lowered her voice playfully, "the morale among the female staff and students has skyrocketed since 8 a.m. Not to mention I've had 3 different students come to the office just to ask about the new gym syllabus, when we all know they just wanted to see if the rumors were true." A younger English teacher, Ms. Rivera, laughed and nudged her colleague. "I noticed that too. My 10th grade girls spent the first 20 minutes of class trying to find his social media. They came up with absolutely nothing. It's like the man is a ghost. A very, very fit ghost." "Well, he's clearly dedicated," Ms. Clark remarked, her gaze drifting toward the corner where Izuku sat. "And I couldn't help but notice. There isn't a ring on his finger. No tan line, either. He seems completely unattached." A round of quiet, knowing giggles broke out among the teachers. Izuku didn't move. He didn't look up, and he didn't let his expression change. He focused entirely on a single piece of broccoli, chewing with a rhythmic, mechanical intensity. His face felt like it was radiating enough heat to cook the rest of his meal, but he remained perfectly still, a pro-hero's DSPN keeping him from reacting. He simply stared at his Tupperware, pretending with every fiber of his being that he was completely oblivious to the fact that the entire faculty was currently dissecting his relationship status. He stayed that way until the warning bell rang, maintaining his clueless mask even as his heart hammered against his ribs. He was used to the press in Japan, but this quiet, suburban domesticity was a battlefield he was not prepared for. He started walking toward the gym, but as he passed the library, he saw her again, the girl with the yellow book. She was sitting at a corner table, her eyes fixed on the pages, that same look of intense, quiet curiosity on her face. Once again, the magnetic pull in his chest gave a small, barely noticeable sharp tug. Izuku paused at the library door, his hand hovering over the handle for a split second. But the bell for his final PRD rang out, echoing through the halls. He had a job to do. With one last look over his shoulder, he hurried toward the gym, the weight of the mystery feeling heavier than any training weight he'd ever lifted. 2 weeks had passed since Izuku Midoriya had first set foot in Leawood, Kansas, and the reality of his situation had finally begun to settle into a cold, hard certainty. He wasn't in a villain's illusion. He wasn't dreaming. He was in an alternate universe, a place where the fundamental laws of his world were dismissed as impossible physics. He spent his nights in the small motel room, filling a notebook with frantic scribbles. He had initially looked for a villain behind this, waiting for a trap to spring, but the silence was absolute. No one was coming for him. There were no energy spikes, no warp signatures, and most disturbingly, no other quirks. In the absence of a battle to fight, Izuku poured himself into his new role. He had become the most popular figure at Blue Valley High. He didn't just teach gym, he revolutionized it. He'd helped the track team shave seconds off their sprints by teaching them specialized breathing techniques he'd learned from Gran Torino, and he spent his lunch breaks helping the outcasts build their confidence. The faculty had grown used to the polite, impossibly fit young man who bowed to the principal and never seemed to lose his temper. Yet, despite his success, one mystery remained. Throughout these 2 weeks, Izuku had found himself keeping a constant eye on one particular student. She was a quiet girl, mysterious in her own way but also strangely, almost aggressively normal. She never participated in the games or the drills, usually finding a spot on the bleachers to disappear into her own world. "Great pass, Leo. Keep your eyes on the rim," Izuku called out, his voice echoing off the rafters. He began to walk along the perimeter of the court, his gaze sweeping over the students. As he passed the bleachers, his eyes made a casual, passing glance toward the mysterious girl. She was distracted, her attention momentarily turned away from her seat, but the thick yellow book she always carried had fallen open, lying flat against the wood. Izuku's heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt as though it had been gripped by a cold, iron hand. There, lying in the harsh fluorescent light, was a vibrant, professionally drawn illustration. It featured a hero in a dark green suit, his face set in a determined scowl, his fists glowing with familiar emerald sparks. Behind him stood the faces of his classmates Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, and the looming, heroic shadow of All Might. The title across the top read, "My Hero Academia." And right in the center, rendered with terrifying detail, was his own face. The world suddenly began to spin. A violent wave of vertigo crashed over him, making the gym floor feel like the deck of a ship in a storm. His breathing hitched, and for a split second his ironclad control snapped. Snaking lines of emerald light lashed out across his body, a chaotic web of green energy that hummed with a sharp, static discharge, casting a jagged, flickering glow against the gym floor. Izuku's knees buckled, and he hit the floor with a heavy thud, his head swimming as the images on the book cover burned into his retinas. "Mr. Midoriya. Coach, are you okay?" The basketball game screeched to a halt as a dozen students rushed toward him. The green lightning had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the students blinking in confusion. "Whoa, did you see that?" one boy muttered, looking at the ceiling lights. "The wiring in here must be fried. I saw green sparks everywhere." "Forget the lights, look at Coach," a girl cried out, kneeling beside him. "Mr. Midoriya, you look ghost white. We need to take you to the nurse right now." Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, forcing the world to stop tilting. The whirlpool of confusion in his mind was deafening. "Why is my face there? Who drew this? Why does it look so real?" He felt a hand on his shoulder and winced, forcing himself to sit up. I'm fine," he rasped, holding up a shaking hand to ward them off. "Just a sudden dizzy spell. I must not have eaten enough breakfast." "Coach, you literally collapsed," Leo said, looking genuinely worried. "Lean on me, I'll take you to the office." No, Izuku insisted, his pro-hero instincts screaming at him to remain the pillar of strength for these kids. He forced a weak, reassuring smile, though his heart was still hammering. "I'm all right. I'll stay here until the bell rings, and then I'll go see the nurse." I promise. Get back to the game, okay? The students lingered, unconvinced, but Izuku's firm tone eventually pushed them back to the court. He sat on the floor for a moment longer, staring at the polished wood, his mind a chaotic mess of questions he couldn't answer. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of the PRD, he stood up on unsteady legs. All right, everyone. Equipment in the bins, please. Great work today. As the students filtered out, chatting nervously about his fainting spell, Izuku saw the girl pick up the yellow book. He moved toward her, his expression polite but carrying an underlying intensity that stopped her in her tracks. Excuse me, he said, his voice firm. Could you come see me in the PE office during your free PRD today? I'd like to discuss your participation. The girl looked up at him, her expression unreadable, and nodded slowly. Okay, Mr. Midoriya. I'll be there. Izuku watched her walk away, his gaze fixed on the yellow book tucked under her arm. He didn't go to the nurse. He walked straight to his small, cramped office and closed the door. He sank into his desk chair, putting his face in his hands. The magnetic pull was no longer a mystery. It was a lead. And for the first time in 2 weeks, he was genuinely afraid of what he was about to find out. The transition between first and second PRD was usually a chaotic rush of slamming lockers and teenage gossip, but today, the air in the hallways felt electric. By the time Izuku had retreated to his office, the fainting spell had already been dissected, embellished, and spread to every corner of the school. Near the cafeteria entrance, a group of students huddled together, their voices hushed but frantic. I'm telling you, it wasn't just bad wiring, Leo insisted to a crowd of his teammates. I was 3 feet away from him. The sparks didn't come from the ceiling, they were on him. Like he was a human Tesla coil or something. Maybe he has a heart condition? A girl from the track team whispered, her brow furrowed in genuine worry. Like an internal defibrillator that malfunctioned? My uncle has one, but it doesn't usually make you glow green. It looked like static electricity on steroids, another boy added, gesturing wildly with his hands. He hit the floor and for a second, it was like the whole gym flickered. It was honestly kind of terrifying. But then he just stood up and acted like nothing happened. Who does that? The rumors weren't restricted to the students. In the teacher's lounge, the atmosphere was equally tense. I saw the lights flicker from across the hall, Mr. Henderson said, leaning against the coffee machine as he spoke to Ms. Rivera. And Gable said he refused to go to the nurse. She's worried it's overexertion. The man works himself like a machine, maybe he finally hit a wall. But the green light? Ms. Rivera asked, her voice skeptical. The kids are calling him the human fuse. They think he's some kind of government experiment. She tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. I just hope he's okay. He looked different when he walked past my door. Like he'd seen a ghost. Inside the PE office, Izuku heard none of it, drowning in his thoughts that he couldn't wrap his head around. He remained slumped in his chair, his hands still pressed against his face. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that cover. The green suit. The scars. The smile of All Might. It was too specific to be a coincidence, yet too impossible to be real. He was a hero. He was the successor of the greatest power in his world. And yet, sitting in this cramped office with its smell of floor wax and old basketballs, he felt smaller than he ever had back when he was quirkless. A soft, hesitant knock echoed against the frosted glass of his door. Izuku stiffened. He dropped his hands, took a jagged breath, and forced his features into a mask of professional composure. He sat up straight, clearing his throat to hide the tremor in his voice. Come in, he called out. The door creaked open, and the girl from the bleachers stepped inside. She looked the same as she always did, unassuming, quiet, and strangely calm. But this time, she wasn't hiding the book. She held it against her chest, the bright yellow spine facing him like a challenge. The magnetic pull in his chest flared into a sharp, insistent throb. You wanted to see me, Mr. Midoriya? She asked. Her eyes darted to his face, searching for the flicker the other students had described, but all she saw was the intense, emerald gaze of a man who looked like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing out the hum of the hallway. The office felt smaller than usual, crowded by the heavy silence between them. Izuku stayed in his chair, his hands clasped tightly on his desk to stop them from shaking. "Thank you for coming, Mabel," he said, his voice sounding thick in his own ears. She stood by the door, not sitting in the offered plastic chair. She noticed his knuckles were white. She also noticed that for the first time since he had arrived at the school, he wasn't smiling. The charming gym teacher was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he was bracing for an explosion. "Is this about my participation grade?" Mabel asked quietly. She shifted the yellow book in her arms. "I run the laps for the credit every day. I'm not very good at sports." "It's not about the laps," Izuku said. He looked at the book the way the yellow spine practically glowed against her sweater. It was pulling at him like a physical weight. "That book? You've been reading it every day since I got here." Mabel looked down at the manga. "Oh, yeah. It's a series from Japan. I'm just rereading the final arc. It's about heroes." "Heroes," Izuku repeated. He forced himself to stand up. Every movement felt like he was moving through deep water. He walked around the desk until he was standing just a few feet away from her. "Mabel, please. I need to see the cover again. Just for a second." She hesitated, her brow furrowing. But there was something in his emerald eyes, a raw, desperate vulnerability that made it impossible to say no. She slowly turned the book around. Izuku didn't grab it. He just stared. His eyes traced the familiar lines of the costume, the specific way the artist had captured the scars on his hands, and the unmistakable silhouette of the classmates he had bled for. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a record. "The boy," Izuku whispered, his Japanese accent becoming much more pronounced in his distress. What is his name?" Mabel stared at him. Up close, the resemblance wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It was exact. The 4 freckles on each cheek. The specific shade of forest green in his hair. Even the small scar on the bridge of his nose. "His name is Izuku Midoriya," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But his hero name is Deku." The sound of his name, his real name coming from her lips, shattered the last of his composure. Izuku stumbled back, hitting the edge of his desk. He looked at the book as if it were a weapon, his mind struggling to process how his most private memories were staring back at him from a store-bought comic. "You know about the war," he said, his voice trembling. "You know about Shigaraki. You know about One for All." It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Mabel's mouth went dry. Her common sense finally gave up. She looked at the man in front of her, the man who had just collapsed while emitting green lightning, and she realized the truth. "It's not just a book, Mr. Midoriya," she said, her hands beginning to shake as she gripped the volume. "In this world, it's a story. It's a comic. Millions of people have read it. It's been around for years." Izuku stared at her, the room suddenly feeling very cold. He looked at the glossy pages, then down at his own scarred palms. The weight of it hit him all at once, the battles, the losses, the sheer agony of the final fight. He wasn't just in a different universe. He was in a universe where his entire existence, his suffering, and his triumphs were nothing more than ink on a page. He sank back into his chair, the silence in the office becoming absolute. Outside, the bell rang for the next PRD, but Izuku didn't move. He just looked at Mabel, a profound, quiet exhaustion in his eyes. He had fought a war to save his world, only to find out that here, that world was just a collection of chapters on a shelf. The silence in the small P office was heavy, broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of the hallway, the slamming of lockers, and the fading chatter of students. Inside, the air felt thin. Izuku sat motionless, his gaze fixed on a small scuff on the edge of his desk. He wasn't looking at the book anymore. He didn't have to. The image was burned into his mind. Every scar the artist had drawn was a scar he could feel on his own skin. Every friend pictured on that cover was someone whose heartbeat he had fought to protect. "A story," he whispered, the word tasting bitter. "Everything we went through. The sacrifices. It's just something people read for fun here." Mabel stood frozen by the door. She saw the way his shoulders slumped, the posture of a man who had carried the world, and finally realized the world he saved was, To this place, nothing more than a series of drawings. The Mr. Midoriya she had seen for the last 2 weeks, the polite, invincible coach, was gone. In his place was the boy from the pages, tired and profoundly alone. It's not just for fun," Mabel said, her voice cracking. Izuku looked up. His green eyes were dull, searching hers for an explanation that made sense. Mabel's grip on the book tightened until her knuckles turned white. For 2 weeks, she had kept her distance, her common sense acting as a shield. She had told herself it was a coincidence. She had told herself she was seeing things. But hearing him speak, seeing the genuine pain in his expression, that shield finally shattered. Her hard shell, the quiet, detached persona she wore like armor, crumbled all at once. Her lower lip trembled, and her eyes began to shimmer with tears that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awe. "It's not just a comic," she choked out, taking a shaky step toward his desk. "To us. To me. You're the person who never gave up. When things were at their worst, when I felt like I couldn't keep going, I'd read about you. I'd see you break your own bones just to save one person who didn't even ask for help. You aren't just ink on a page, Mr. Midoriya. You're my hero." The raw honesty in her voice hit Izuku harder than any physical blow. He blinked, stunned, as the girl who had spent 2 weeks avoiding his gaze now looked at him with a level of reverence that made his heart ache. He saw her tears, and the pro-hero inside him reacted before his brain could catch up. The existential dread didn't vanish, but it was pushed aside by his core nature, the need to help. He stood up slowly, his movements careful. He didn't approach her, he didn't want to startle her, but he reached across the desk, offering a box of tissues with a faint, wobbling smile. "Mabel," he said softly, his voice regaining some of its warmth. I didn't mean to upset you. I'm sorry." Mabel let out a wet, shaky laugh, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You're sorry? You just found out your life is a book in another dimension, and you're apologizing to me for crying." Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, a familiar, bashful habit. "Old habits, I guess." Mabel took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She set the yellow book down on his desk, sliding it toward him. "You should see. Not just the cover. You should see what they know about you." Izuku hesitated, then slowly reached out. His scarred fingers touched the glossy paper. It felt real. It felt mundane. He opened the book to a random page in the middle of the final volume. His breath caught. It was a panel of him and Bakugo, standing back to back amidst the rubble of Yue. The dialogue was translated into English, but he remembered the moment perfectly. He remembered the smell of smoke and the exact rhythm of Kaken's breathing. They even got his scowl. "Right," Izuku murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips before it faded into something more solemn. "If this is all here, then you know everything? My mom? All Might? The secret of the quirk?" Mabel nodded slowly. "Everything. We know about the vestiges. We know about the final fight with Shigaraki. We know how it ends." Izuku closed the book, the weight of it feeling like lead in his hands. He looked at Mabel, really looked at her, and realized that in this strange, quirkless world, this teenager knew his soul better than almost anyone he had ever met. "Then I suppose," Izuku said, his voice steadying, "I have a lot of questions. And it seems you're the only person who can answer them." Izuku opened the book again, flipping through the pages with a mix of reverence and disbelief. He saw the battle at Jaka Hospital, the dark PRD where he had wandered the streets of Japan alone, and finally, the bright, tear-filled faces of Class 1A bringing him home. "It's all here," he whispered, tracing a finger over a drawing of his mother, Inko. "The artist. They even captured the way she cries when she's worried. It's so precise." Mabel sat on the edge of the plastic chair now, her initial shock giving way to the realization that her hero was actually asking her for information. "The creator is a man named Kohei Horikoshi. He says he just wanted to tell a story about what makes a hero. He has no idea you're actually real, Mr. Midoriya. No one does." Izuku nodded slowly, closing the volume. "In my world, we always say that stories carry a spirit of their own." Maybe he was tapping into something he didn't understand. A connection between worlds. He looked at her, his expression serious. Is there anything about how I got here? Any extra chapters or sequels that mention me disappearing? Mabel shook her head. No. The story ends with you as a pro. It doesn't say anything about portals or Kansas. As far as the readers know, you're still back home, living your life. Izuku leaned back, a long breath escaping his lungs. Then I really am off the map. He paused for a moment. I could try tapping my heels 3 times and saying, there's no place like home. After all, we are in Kansas. Izuku chuckled softly, smiling slightly and closing his eyes. He went quiet for a moment, processing the fact that he was effectively a lost character. But then he noticed Mabel. She was vibrating with a nervous, frantic energy, her hands twitching toward her backpack. Now that the hard shell had cracked and Izuku had stabilized, the fan inside her was reaching a boiling point. I think I've asked enough for now, Izuku said with a soft, tired smile. You've been incredibly helpful, Mabel. Truly. That was the green light she needed. Mabel leaned forward, her eyes wide and sparkling, the words tumbling out of her mouth like a dam had burst. I have so many questions. The manga shows the big stuff, but what about the small things? Like, does Bakugo actually apologize to you more than once? The fans debate that constantly. And what does Todoroki's cold side actually feel like? Is it like a refrigerator or more like dry ice? And oh my god, is the food at UA really as good as Lunch Rush makes it look? Because some of the panels make that katsudon look life-changing. Izuku blinked, momentarily overwhelmed by the sudden barrage. He let out a startled, genuine laugh, the first real laugh he'd had in 2 weeks. Well, Kaken isn't big on verbal apologies, but he shows it in his own way. And Todoroki? It's more like a crisp winter morning, actually. Very refreshing once you get used to it. And the katsudon? She pressed, leaning over his desk. Life-changing, Izuku confirmed, nodding solemnly. I dream about it sometimes. Mabel's face lit up with a grin that could have rivaled All Might's. I knew it. Okay, one more, the Black Whip quirk. When you first manifested it, the manga made it look like it was tied entirely to your anger. But later on, you looked so fluid with it. I always wondered, does it feel like an extra limb, or is it more like a feeling in your nerves? Can you actually feel the texture of what the whips touch? Izuku's eyes brightened. Talking about the mechanics of quirks was his own version of geeking out. For a moment, he forgot he was in a different universe. He was just a hero nerd talking to another hero nerd. It's definitely emotional, Izuku explained, gesturing with his scarred hands. It's like a physical manifestation of my will. And as for feeling things... He paused, glancing at the closed office door and the frosted glass window. He took a steadying breath. He hadn't dared to use his quirks for anything more than a split-second burst of speed or strength since arriving in this fragile, quirkless world. But here, with Mabel, the one person who already knew his soul, it felt right. It's easier to show you, he whispered. Izuku focused. He didn't call on the destructive power of one for all, but rather the coiled, shadowy energy of the fifth user. Suddenly, a thick vine of black energy erupted from Izuku's hand. It wasn't just a shadow, it was physical, crackling with tiny beads of emerald electricity. The whip curled through the air of the cramped office with a soft, predatory hiss, moving with the grace of a serpent. Mabel's breath hitched. She froze, her eyes going wide as the dark energy illuminated the room. She didn't move, afraid that even a breath would make the phantom disappear. Go ahead, Izuku said softly, the black vine hovering inches from her. You can touch it. It's solid. With a trembling hand, Mabel reached out. Her fingertips brushed against the black whip. It felt like cold silk wrapped around high-voltage wire, firm, humming with power, and strangely alive. Oh my god, she whispered. You still have them. I thought because this world is so normal I thought the powers wouldn't work here. I thought you'd be quirkless. I thought so too at first, Izuku admitted, watching the whip retreat back into his skin as he deactivated it. But the energy is still inside me. It's a part of me, no matter what universe I'm in. Mabel stared at his arm where the energy had just been, her head shaking in disbelief. Seeing it in a book is one thing, but seeing it actually happen, seeing the light it gives off. She looked up at him, her voice thick with awe. It's real, all of it. The stories aren't just stories. The sheer shock on her face made Izuku realize just how much hope his existence provided. To her, he wasn't just a teacher who had fainted, he was a living miracle. I can't believe this, Mabel said, leaning back and catching her breath, a wide, slightly manic smile breaking through her tears. I'm talking quirk theory with the real Deku. And I just touched Black Whip. My friends are going to think I've finally lost my mind. Well, Izuku said, his smile turning a bit more wistful as he looked at the yellow book on his desk. If you've lost yours, I've definitely lost mine. But, thank you, Mabel. For a moment there, I felt like I was back at you. Mabel's smile softened. She looked at the man who had inspired her for years, seeing the hero and the person all at once. You're not alone here, Mr. Midoriya. You might be in the wrong world, but you're still the person who helps people. And I'm going to help you figure this out. I promise. Mabel stood up, carefully tucking the volume of My Hero Academia back into her bag. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from heavy, world-shattering dread to a quiet, mutual understanding. She reached the door and gripped the handle, her mind racing a mile a minute. She stopped. Her hand stayed on the knob, and a look of absolute, sheer terror different from the awe she'd felt earlier crossed her face. Wait, she whispered, turning back slowly. Izuku, who was currently trying to figure out how to fold his much too large shoulders back into his tiny office chair, looked up. Is something wrong, Mabel? Mabel didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, then at her backpack, then back at him. A deep, crimson blush started at her neck and worked its way up to her forehead. Could this be linked to the fan fiction I'm writing? She blurted out. Izuku blinked. Fan fiction? He'd heard the term fiction before, obviously, but the way she said it with a mix of pride and soul-crushing embarrassment made him tilt his head in confusion. Is that a technical report? Like a support item analysis? No, Mabel squeaked, covering her face with one hand while the other gestured vaguely in the air. Okay, so in this world, since the story is so popular, people write their own stories using the characters. It's called fan fiction. 2 weeks ago, I started a new story. Izuku's eyes widened. You wrote a story about me? I wrote a story about you getting stuck in a world without powers and having to work as a PE teacher in the Midwest. She practically yelled, the words coming out in one panicked breath. The silence that followed was absolute. Izuku stared at her. Mabel stared at the floor, wishing it would open up and swallow her whole. You wrote exactly what is happening to me? Izuku asked, his voice trembling not with fear this time, but with pure, unadulterated bewilderment. Mabel, that's a very specific prediction. Did you also write about the lunch ladies giving me extra broccoli? I might have mentioned you being popular with the staff, she muffled into her hand. But it's not a prediction, Mr. Midoriya. I think I did this. I was so sad the series was over, and I was sitting in my room wishing you were real. I was writing and wishing and just putting everything I had into that first chapter. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of guilt and realization. They say children in this world don't have quirks, but my mom always said I had an overactive imagination. What if my creativity just manifested? What if I willed you here because I didn't want the story to end? Izuku sat in his chair, his head spinning as he tried to process the fact that his life was currently a work in progress. He looked at Mabel, who was still bright red, nervously fidgeting with her backpack straps. So, if I'm here because you wrote it, Izuku began slowly, does that mean I'm stuck here until you finish the story? I think so, Mabel whispered. I mean, I didn't mean for it to be literal. I just wanted to explore the Midoriya in the Midwest aesthetic. Suddenly, Mabel's eyes went wide. She let out a sharp gasp and slapped her forehead so hard the sound echoed off the metal filing cabinets. Oh no. Oh, I am so sorry. Izuku's hero instincts immediately flared. He leaned forward, his green eyes sharp. What is it? Is there a villain? Did you write a surprise attack for Chapter 10? No, Mabel groaned, her face buried in her hands. I just remembered. If you're here because of my latest story, then I guess Kaken might have been transported too, huh? Izuku's heart plummeted. The image of Katsuki Bakugo, a man who was essentially a human stick of dynamite being dropped into a quirkless, unsuspecting world, was a recipe for a global disaster. Kaken is here? Izuku scrambled to his feet, accidentally knocking over a jar of whistles. Mabel! Where is he? Is he in Kansas? Is he in trouble? If he thinks he's been kidnapped by a villain, he's going to level an entire city block. We have to find him before he starts a war. Izuku was practically vibrating, his hand reaching for a phone he didn't have, his mind calculating search perimeters and blast radii. To his complete shock, Mabel didn't look panicked. Instead, she let out a small, stifled snort. Then a giggle. Within seconds, she was clutching her stomach, laughing so hysterically that she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling over. It's not funny, Mabel. Izuku cried, his hair standing on end. Kaken is dangerous. No, you don't understand. Mabel gasped for air, wiping tears from her eyes. I didn't put him in a gym. I was watching TV while I wrote the beginning, and I thought it would be a funny, crossover idea. She scrambled over to Izuku's desk and began frantically typing on his office computer. I put him in Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen? Izuku blinked, his panic pausing for a moment of pure confusion. Is that a villain's hideout? A specialized training facility? It's a reality cooking show, Mabel wheezed, hitting the enter key. With a really angry British chef. Look. She turned the monitor toward him. The screen showed a promotional clip for the newest episode of a hit reality series. The title card flashed, Season 24, The Explosive New Chef. The video started with a shot of a professional kitchen in total chaos. In the center of the frame, wearing a crisp white chef's jacket that looked like it was about to burst from his muscles, was a very familiar blonde man. He was holding a sauté pan in one hand and pointing a finger aggressively at a man with spiky hair who looked like he was about to cry. You call this risotto, you pathetic waste of space? Bakugo's voice boomed through the tiny computer speakers, crisp and clear. It's bland. It's undercooked. I've seen better consistency in the rubble of a fallen building. Get out of my sight before I blast you into next Tuesday. The camera cut to the show's host, Gordon Ramsay, who was standing in the corner with his arms crossed, looking remarkably impressed and slightly terrified at the same time. Izuku stared at the screen, his jaw hanging open. He's making rice. He's winning, actually, Mabel giggled, pointing at the comment section of the video. Izuku leaned in, reading the comments, scrolling past at lightning speed. At User 1, Chef Dynamite is actually scaring Ramsay. I'm obsessed. At Kitchen Fan, why does Chef Dynamite look like he's about to explode the stove with his bare hands? At Gordon Simp, finally, someone with more rage than Gordon. Chef Dynamite for the win. At My Hero Girl, does anyone else notice this guy looks and sounds a lot like Bakugo from My Hero Academia? Izuku's horrified expression began to twitch. He looked at Bakugo, who was currently throwing a head of lettuce at a sous chef, and then he looked at the name, Chef Dynamite. It was so absurd, so perfectly Bakugo, that his panic finally broke. A small snort escaped his nose. Then another. Within seconds, Izuku was leaning against his desk, clutching his side as he joined Mabel in her laughter. He's actually in his element, Izuku wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. The high pressure, the shouting, the constant need for perfection. He's probably the only person on Earth who finds that show relaxing. I told you. Mabel laughed. He's a natural. Izuku sank back into his chair, the weight of the last 2 weeks finally feeling a little lighter. He watched Bakugo scream at a head chef about the proper temperature for searing scallops, and for the first time, the multiverse didn't feel quite so scary. Mabel, Izuku said, his voice faint as he watched Bakugo threaten to murder a garnish. Please. Start writing the next chapter soon. I need to get to Kaken as soon as possible. 3 days had passed since the world-shattering revelation in the PE office. To the rest of Blue Valley High, Mr. Midoriya was just a remarkably dedicated teacher who had recovered quickly from a minor dizzy spell. But for Izuku, every moment spent in the gym was now colored by a strange, bittersweet irony. He was a man out of time and out of his own universe, yet he had never felt more useful. His teaching style had evolved from simple instruction to something more profound. He didn't just teach the students how to run, he taught them how to endure. Don't look at the finish line, Sarah. Izuku called out, jogging backward with effortless grace alongside a struggling freshman. Focus on your next 3 steps. That's all you need to worry about. Small victories lead to the big ones. The girl, who usually spent gym PRD trying to blend into the brickwork, let out a ragged breath and pushed harder, her sneakers slapping the pavement with a new sense of purpose. When she finally crossed the mark, Izuku was there with a high five that felt like a medal of honor. By the second PRD, Izuku was working with the rebel seniors, a group of boys who usually spent their time mocking the curriculum. Today, he had them doing a specialized circuit training he'd adapted from the UA entrance exam prep. Mr. Midoriya, one of the boys wheezed, wiping sweat from his forehead. You said this was basic conditioning. My legs feel like they're made of lead. Izuku offered a bright, encouraging smile, the kind that had once rallied pro-heroes in the face of certain doom. That's the feeling of your muscles getting stronger. You're doing great, Marcus. Your form on those squats was perfect. You have a natural center of gravity that would be an asset in any high-pressure situation. Marcus puffed out his chest, the sarcasm dying on his lips. No one had ever told him he was an asset. Before, they always just told him he was an but. Between classes, the faculty lounge was still thick with rumors, but they had shifted from concern to admiration. The Chef Dynamite video had gone viral over the weekend, and while no one at the school made the connection between the screaming blonde chef and their polite gym teacher, the energy of unexplained excellence seemed to be in the water. Mr. Midoriya? Izuku turned to see Mabel standing by the equipment shed. She looked like she hadn't slept in 48 hours. Her hair was messy, and there was a frantic, enlightened glow in her eyes. She was clutching a notebook to her chest like it was a holy relic. Mabel? Are you all right? Izuku asked, stepping away from the students. Energetic. I had an epiphany, she whispered, her voice vibrating with excitement. I spent all night trying to write a way for you to get to California. I was coming up with plane tickets, bus rides, car rentals. And then I realized I was being an idiot. I was overthinking the plot. Izuku tilted his head. Overthinking it? But we have to get to Kaken. No, we don't, Mabel said, a small, slightly mischievous smirk playing on her lips. I'm the writer, remember? If I could will you into this school by accident, I can certainly will him here on purpose. Why should we go to the drama when I can just bring the drama to Kansas? Izuku's eyes widened. Mabel, wait, you're going to write him here? Into the school? Think about it. It makes way more sense for the story, she said, tapping her notebook. The A Hell's Kitchen bit was just a funny prologue. The real meat of the story is the reunion. I've already started the draft. I'm writing that he gets disqualified for aggressive behavior. Shocker. I know, and he somehow ends up following a lead that brings him right to Blue Valley. Izuku looked around the peaceful, suburban gym. He looked at the quiet lockers, the polite students, and the faculty lounge where people drank tea and talked about history. Then he imagined Katsuki Bakugo standing in the middle of it. Mabel, Izuku said, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. This school is not built for Kaken. He doesn't do polite. He doesn't even do indoor voices. And you're making him a teacher? Not a teacher, Mabel said, her eyes glinting with a truly devious light. I thought about the lunch ladies, but honestly, it wasn't enough drama. I needed something with more. So I changed the draft. As of tomorrow, the district has hired a new disciplinary officer to handle student conduct. Izuku's face went pale. A disciplinary officer? Mabel, Kaken's idea of discipline is a controlled explosion and a lecture about how everyone else is an extra. Exactly, Mabel whispered, her voice full of suppressed glee. Think about it. This school is too quiet. Everyone is too nice. And besides... Her smile faltered for a second, turning into something more determined. There's this guy in my junior class, Adam. He's been a total JRK lately. He saw me reading my manga in the library and started calling me a weirdo and delusional. He even tried to grab the book yesterday. Izuku's expression shifted instantly. The nervousness vanished, replaced by the protective gravity of a hero. He was bullying you? He's just one of those guys who thinks he's untouchable because he's on the football team. Mabel shrugged, though her hand gripped her notebook a little tighter. I figured, why go to LA to find Kaken when I can bring him here to straighten out the hallway situation? I wrote that the school board was looking for someone with high intensity and zero tolerance for nonsense. Who fits that better than the man who won the UA Sports Festival while chained to a podium? Izuku looked at Mabel, then at the computer screen where Chef Dynamite was currently telling a contestant that their face looked like an unwashed potato. He realized then that Mabel wasn't just writing a story, she was seeking justice like a mini mastermind. He found her mischievous expression in that moment to be truly hilarious. Kaken hates bullies, Izuku said softly, a small, knowing smile finally breaking through his worry. He's complicated, but he has a very loud sense of right and wrong. If Adam tries anything tomorrow, he's in for a very rude awakening. I know, Mabel grinned, her confidence returning. I already wrote the scene where Adam gets sent to the office for being a loudmouth. He thinks he's going to get a lecture from Principal Miller. He has no idea he's going to be facing a human landmine in a suit. Izuku let out a long, shaky breath, rubbing the back of his neck. He could already hear the yelling. He could already smell the faint scent of nitroglycerin in the hallways. I should probably start clearing some space in the gym, Izuku murmured. If Kaken is the disciplinary officer, I have a feeling I'm going to be seeing a lot of students volunteering for extra laps just to stay out of his office. Welcome to Chapter 10, Mr. Midoriya, Mabel said, tucking her notebook away. It's called The New Law of Blue Valley High. Despite his tame behavior, the atmosphere in the front office was suffocating. Katsuki Bakugo didn't need to yell to be terrifying. He did it simply by existing. He stood behind the desk, dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit that screamed authority. He wasn't sparking or shouting. Instead, he moved with a terrifying, silent precision, filing paperwork and reviewing student records with a gaze so sharp it felt like it was cutting the paper. The faculty and students watched him from a distance. To them, he was a predator in a suit, a man whose stillness was more threatening than most people's rage. He hasn't said a word in 20 minutes, Ms. Rivera whispered to a group of nervous juniors in the hall. He just watches, like he's waiting for someone to break a rule. It's like having a lion as a hall monitor. Izuku pushed through the office doors, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw the blonde hair first, spiked but neatly trimmed. He saw the rigid, perfect posture. Bakugo sensed the door opening. He didn't snap his head around. He turned slowly, his crimson eyes scanning the newcomer with practiced, professional caution. He had been in this world for days, hiding his confusion behind a wall of cold, calculated DSP. He had been playing the part of the perfect officer, waiting for a sign that he wasn't alone in this void. Then he saw the green hair. He saw the freckles. The disciplinary officer mask didn't just slip, it shattered. For the first time since he had arrived in Blue Valley, Katsuki Bakugo smiled. It wasn't his usual explosive smirk. It was a look of pure, raw relief. Izuku, he breathed, his voice breaking the silence like a gunshot. Before the secretaries could even blink, the terrifying officer was a blur of motion. He didn't stomp. He practically lunged across the floor, catching Izuku in a fierce, bone-crushing hug that lifted the smaller man off his feet. The entire office went dead silent. The attendance secretary dropped her stapler. A group of students in the hallway froze mid-step, their mouths hanging open. The Lion of Blue Valley was currently clinging to the gym teacher like a lifeline. Bakugo pulled back just enough to grip Izuku's shoulders, his words coming out in a frantic, rapid-fire stream of Japanese that left the English-speaking staff completely in the dark. Damn it, Deku. I finally found you. Where the hell is this place? No quirks, no heroes. I thought I was alone here. Izuku laughed, his eyes stinging with happy tears as he gripped Bakugo's forearms. He replied in the same hurried tongue, their voices overlapping in a chaotic, joyful rhythm. Kak and me too. Mabel told me. I saw you on TV. Don't mention that crappy cooking show. Bakugo barked, though he was still grinning, his eyes bright with a warmth the students never thought possible. He leaned his forehead against Izuku's for a fleeting second, a gesture of deep, unspoken brotherhood forged in fire. To the observers in the office, it was the most baffling thing they had ever witnessed. The two most intimidating men in the building were currently sharing a moment of profound, emotional vulnerability. Within 10 minutes, the front office was empty, but the faculty lounge was packed. The speed at which the news traveled was faster than a state record sprint. The close, Ms. Rivera said, leaning over the table, her eyes wide. I mean really close. They were speaking Japanese so fast it sounded like code, and the way they looked at each other? It wasn't just friends. It was like they'd just survived a plane crash together. I heard they're brothers, Mr. Henderson added, stirring his coffee frantically. Look at them. They're both built like professional athletes and they both have that intense stare. Maybe they're part of some elite overseas unit. No, did you see the hug? Mrs. Gable chimed in, shaking her head. That wasn't a brotherly pat on the back. That was, I thought you were dead energy. And the new guy, Mr. Bakugo, he smiled at Midoriya. A real, genuine smile. He hasn't even blinked at the rest of us without looking like he wanted to arrest us. They have to be ex-military, a coach suggested. The scars on Midoriya's hands, the way Bakugo carries himself like a weapon. And now they're both here, in the middle of nowhere, working at the same high school? They're hiding from something. Or someone. By lunch, the prevailing theory among the students was even more dramatic. The secret lovers theory was fighting for dominance against the secret agents on the run theory. But regardless of the label, one thing was clear, Blue Valley High was no longer just a school. It was the stage for something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Bakugo finally stepped back, straightening his suit jacket. He looked back at Izuku, his voice dropping to a whisper. We have to talk. Tell me you have a plan to get us out of this suburban nightmare. Izuku glanced at the window, where he could see Mabel watching from a distance with a look of pure, satisfied triumph. I don't have a plan yet, Kaken, Izuku admitted. But I think I know an author. The PE office had never felt so crowded. With the door locked and the blinds drawn, the space was thick with the scent of coffee and the faint, sharp smell of ozone that always seemed to cling to Bakugo. Katsuki paced the 3-foot stretch of floor like a caged tiger. He had tossed his suit jacket onto Izuku's desk, and the sleeves of his white dress shirt were rolled up, revealing the familiar, sturdy forearms that Izuku knew so well. A brat, Katsuki muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. You're telling me a teenage girl with a notebook is the reason I spent 48 hours being filmed by 100 cameras while screaming at people who couldn't even chop an onion? Izuku sat on the edge of his desk, watching Katsuki with a mixture of sympathy and a growing, warm amusement. Seeing him here real, solid, and complaining was a relief so sharp it was almost painful. It sounds impossible, Kaken. I know, Izuku said softly. But look at us. We're here. I'm just glad it's you. I don't think I could have done this with anyone else. Katsuki stopped his pacing. He turned to look at Izuku, his crimson eyes losing their usual jagged edge. The silence in the office changed. It wasn't just two allies talking shop. It was the heavy, loaded silence of two people who had been through a war together and were now realizing they were the only ones left. Yeah, Katsuki said, his voice dropping into a low, gruff tone. Me neither. He stepped closer, invading Izuku's space in a way that felt natural. He wrapped his arms around his friend. So, this girl, Katsuki cleared his throat, forcing the professional mask back on. She's the author. She wrote me in as the disciplinary officer because some punk is giving her a hard time? Izuku nodded, his gaze lingering on Katsuki's face a second too long. His name is Adam. Mabel thinks you can straighten him out. Katsuki's eyes flashed. DSPLN. I can do that. I've dealt with villains, monsters, and gods. I think I can handle one high schooler with an ego. Third PRD had just begun, and the hallway outside the library was supposed to be quiet. Instead, it was occupied by Adam, a broad-shouldered junior with a varsity jacket and a smug grin that suggested he thought the rules were merely suggestions. He was currently blocking Mabel's path to the water fountain, leaning against the lockers with a dominating presence. Hey, weirdo, Adam drawled, his voice echoing in the hall. I saw your a friend in the office earlier. The one you were crying over. You really think some new guy in a suit is gonna change anything? You're still just a girl who lives in a fantasy world. Mabel gripped her notebook, her face pale. Leave me alone, Adam. He's the disciplinary officer. If he catches you. If he catches me what? I'm the star quarterback. The principal. Adam's voice died in his throat as the air in the hallway seemed to thicken. A heavy, measured footfall sounded behind him. Adam turned, expecting to see a teacher he could charm. Instead, he hit a wall of charcoal gray wool. Adam was tall for a high schooler, but the man standing before him was a titan. Bakugo didn't just stand there, he loomed. Thanks to Mabel's writing manifesting him at his peak physical prime, he towered over the boy, his broad shoulders blocking out the fluorescent hallway lights. He looked down at Adam with a gaze that felt like the edge of a blade. You're Adam, right? Bakugo asked. His voice was dangerously low, vibrating with a gravelly, controlled power. Adam had to crane his neck back just to look Bakugo in the eye. Up close, the disciplinary officer was terrifying. The faint, sharp scent of smoke clung to him, and his crimson eyes didn't look like they belonged to a normal person. They looked like they'd seen things that would make a football game look like a tea party. Yeah, Adam managed, his voice cracking. I was just... You were just leaving, Bakugo interrupted. He took a single, slow step forward, forcing Adam back against the lockers with the sheer pressure of his presence. Bakugo leaned down, his face inches from the boy's, casting him in shadow. I've been looking at your file. You like to throw your weight around because you think you're the strongest thing in this building. Bakugo's lip curled into a cold, professional sneer. In my world, we call people like you extras. You're a background character trying to play a lead role, and your performance is pathetic. He reached out not to strike, but to slowly, deliberately straighten the collar of Adam's varsity jacket. The boy was shaking so hard the lockers rattled. If I hear you speak to this student again, if I even see you looking in her direction with that stupid look on your face, I won't just give you a detention, Bakugo whispered, his voice like grinding stones. I will dismantle your star status until you're just another kid sitting in the back of the room, too afraid to open his mouth. Do we have an understanding, or do I need to be less polite? You understood, Adam squeaked. Go to class. Now, Bakugo commanded, pointing a single finger down the hall. Adam didn't wait. He scrambled away, his sneakers squeaking frantically on the tile. Bakugo watched him go for a beat, his expression returning to a bored, professional calm. He turned to Mabel, who was currently frozen in place, her notebook clutched to her chest. Mabel wasn't just shocked. She was captivated. Up close, Bakugo was everything the manga had promised and more: the sharp jawline, the intense eyes, the sheer, overwhelming, don't mess with me energy. Her face was a shade of pink that rivaled Midoriya sneakers. You, Bakugo said, looking at her. Go to class. And stop letting idiots like that talk to you. You're the one holding the pen, aren't you? Mabel didn't move. She just stared up at him, her heart doing a frantic drum solo. Yes, sir, she whispered, her voice dazed. As Bakugo turned and walked away with a sharp, disciplined gait, Mabel leaned against the wall, her knees feeling like jelly. Oh no, she thought, a frantic, goofy grin spreading across her face. I wrote him too hot. I definitely wrote him too hot. The afternoon sun streamed through the high gym windows as the students filed in. They had already heard the rumors of the Titan in the hallway, and they were on their best behavior. Izuku stood at the center of the court, a whistle around his neck, looking incredibly excited. Alright, everyone. For the rest of the week, we have a guest instructor helping us with our conditioning. This is Mr. Bakugo. Katsuki stood by the equipment rack, watching with an observant eye. He had ditched the suit jacket, revealing a black shirt that strained against his broad frame. When he saw a student struggling with their form, he didn't bark orders. Instead, he walked over, his heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood. "Hey," Bakugo said to a freshman who was struggling with a plank. He knelt down, which still made him taller than the kid, and adjusted the student's elbows with a steady hand. "Keep your core tight. If you sag, you're only hurting your back. You've got this. 30 more seconds. I'm counting for you." His voice was firm but undeniably supportive. He stayed right there, nodding as the student finished the set. Izuku trotted over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're a natural at this, Kaken. I think they really look up to you." Bakugo stood up, towering over Izuku by a good few inches. He looked at Izuku, and for a split second, a small, genuine smile flickered on his face. He reached out and gave Izuku's shoulder a supportive squeeze. "A good job," that spoke volumes. "They're just kids, Deku," Bakugo muttered, his voice dropping into a softer, more caring tone. "They need a push, but they need to know someone's actually watching their back. Just like you do." Izuku beamed, his eyes sparkling. "We make a pretty good team." "Yeah," Bakugo grunted, his fiery personality showing through a smirk. "A team that's going to make these kids the strongest in the state. Now get back to it before I take over your whistle." Mabel, sitting on the bleachers, was scribbling so fast her pen was smoking. From the top row of the bleachers, Mabel sat with her pen flying across the page. Mabel's secret journal entry, "New discovery, the big grump actually has a heart of gold. Also, the height difference is real. Bakugo just towers over everyone, including Midoriya. I am 100% sure I have a crush on my own creation. Send help." A week had passed since the famed Lion of Blue Valley entered the scene, and rumors of the nature of his and Izuku's relationship spread like wildfire. "I heard they were dating. I heard they were related. Look at the height difference, maybe they're distant cousins. I heard they went to war together. Have you seen the scars on Mr. Midoriya? All over his arms? You don't get those from slipping on a treadmill." The two men decided it was best to just ignore the rumors. After all, they would die down eventually. But they didn't. In fact, they mutated. By Wednesday, the theory was that they were secret agents hiding from a global syndicate. By Friday, the freshman class was convinced Bakugo was a deposed prince and Izuku was his elite royal guard. It eventually got to the point where it was affecting their work. Students were too busy whispering to do their laps, and every time Izuku smiled or Bakugo offered a supportive pat on the back, the gym filled with the sound of 30 synchronized gasps. Something had to be done. Izuku leaned against the break room counter, clutching a printout from the school's anonymous confession board that a student had accidentally left behind. He was shaking not with fear, but with suppressed giggles. "Kaken, you have to hear this one," Izuku wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "A group of freshmen is convinced that you are an undercover prince from a small European nation, and I'm your body double who took a mysterious blow for you, which explains my scars." Katsuki, who had been mid-sip of his coffee, nearly choked. He set the cup down with a muffled thud, his face contorted as he tried to keep his scary officer persona intact. "A prince?" Katsuki barked, though a smirk was tugging at his lips. "Do I look like I spend my time in a palace? And a body double? Deku, you can't even lie about what you had for breakfast without turning red. You'd be a terrible double." Izuku burst out laughing, doubling over. "It gets better. Ms. Rivera told the history department that she's 80% certain we're time travelers sent back to stop a specific student from failing algebra because they'll eventually invent cold fusion." Katsuki finally lost it. He let out a loud, rough laugh that echoed off the break room walls, a sound so rare and genuine that a passing janitor froze in the hallway. "Time travelers? If I could time travel, I'd go back 10 minutes and stop myself from drinking this terrible coffee. Cold fusion? I can't even get these kids to do a proper push-up. They spent a few minutes leaning against the counter, caught in a fit of wheezing laughter. To the outside world, they were the war-torn survivors or secret lovers. But here, they were just two best friends finding the absolute absurdity of their situation delightful. I think my favorite, Izuku gasped, catching his breath, is the one where they think you're my long-lost brother who was raised by wolves. That's why you're so fierce and protective. Katsuki wiped a stray tear from the corner of his eye, his fiery energy returning, but with a humorous glint. Raised by wolves? Honestly, considering how I grew up around the old hag, they aren't entirely wrong on that one. Izuku snorted. Fair point. All right, Katsuki said, straightening his tie and regaining his composure, though his eyes were still bright. We should probably go out there and tell them we aren't princes or time travelers. As much as I like the idea of being a prince, the rumors are making the kids too nervous to actually do physical activity. You're right, Izuku smiled, his face still glowing from the laughter. Let's go be normal teachers again. Lead the way, Prince Midoriya, Katsuki teased, giving him a supportive, playful shove toward the door. Later that afternoon, the faculty lounge was packed. The air was thick with the scent of cheap coffee and intense curiosity. Principal Miller sat at the head of the table, looking nervous, while Izuku and Katsuki stood at the front like two men about to deliver a very serious briefing. Katsuki took the lead. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer, commanding weight of his presence made the room go silent instantly. Listen up, Katsuki began, his voice dropping into a rough, serious register. We're calling this meeting because the environment in this school has become unproductive. Mr. Midoriya and I are here to work. But lately, it's been hard to get a single gym class finished because we're being treated like a tourist attraction. Izuku stepped forward, looking earnest and slightly troubled. The rumors have reached a point where they're getting in the way of our work. We've heard everything from us being secret agents to international fugitives. It's a distraction for the students, and frankly, it's a distraction for us. We want to set the record straight so we can all move on. The teachers leaned in, hanging on every word. The truth is, Izuku said, his voice soft and practiced, Katsuki and I grew up together. We aren't related by blood, but we're basically brothers. We've known each other since we were 4 years old. Katsuki stepped closer to Izuku, his expression softening into that fiercely protective brother look. We went through a traumatic incident back home, Katsuki said, the lie sliding out with effortless conviction. The fire. It was bad. That's where the scars came from. He gestured vaguely toward Izuku's arms. I was there and I've been looking out for him ever since. It's why I'm a little convinced. It's why I'm protective. It's not a conspiracy, it's just our history. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the vending machine. Ms. Rivera was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. We're just two guys who survived something together and wanted a quiet place to teach, Izuku added with a small, sad smile. Please. If you want the rumors to stop, you have to stop feeding them. We just want to do our jobs. As the teachers filed out, whispering in hushed, sympathetic tones about the poor boys and such a beautiful bond, Katsuki and Izuku waited until the door clicked shut. The second they were alone, Katsuki's serious face broke. He leaned back against the table, a sharp, triumphant smirk crossing his face. A fire, Deku? Katsuki whispered, his shoulders lurching as he tried to stifle a laugh. That's the best you could do? Real original. Izuku let out a breath he'd been holding, his face turning bright red from suppressed giggles. It was the first thing I thought of. And technically, with your quirk back home, it's not entirely a lie. There were definitely flames involved. Basically brothers, Katsuki mimicked in a high-pitched voice, giving Izuku a playful, supportive shove. You were laying it on thick. Rivera was practically sobbing. She's probably going to bring us sympathy donuts tomorrow morning. Hey, it worked. Izuku laughed, leaning into the nudge. They believe us. Now the rumors are about us being brave survivors instead of time-traveling spies. That's way easier to manage while teaching dodgeball. Katsuki snorted, his eyes bright with humor. Yeah. Whatever keeps the extras from asking me if I've ever seen the face of the enemy. Come on, Prince Midoriya. Let's go get some lunch before the next PRD starts. Katsuki hadn't even reached his desk before Ms. Rivera appeared, clutching a box of expensive, artisan donuts and wearing an expression of such profound pity that it made his skin crawl. Mr. Bakugo, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I just wanted to say, you are so brave. To carry that burden of protecting Mr. Midoriya after such a tragedy, please, take the maple glaze. You need the sugar for your strength. Katsuki stared at the donut like it was a live grenade. I'm just doing my job, Rivera. And I don't need strength sugar. I need people to stop whispering whenever I walk into the faculty lounge. Of course, she said, nodding frantically while dabbing her eyes. So brave. So stoic. Across the hall, Izuku was having a similar problem. He was currently surrounded by 3 English teachers who were trying to offer him extra cushions for his office chair and asking if the fluorescent lights were too reminiscent of the fire. I'm okay. Really? Izuku chirped, his smile beginning to ache from the effort of maintaining it. It was a long time ago. I'm very well adjusted. Such a soldier, one of them sighed, patting his arm. While the teachers were busy being supportive, the students had their own take on the new information. High schoolers being high schoolers, the tragic fire story had been dissected and remixed within 20 minutes of the first bell. Mabel sat at her usual table in the cafeteria, listening to the chatter. So they aren't spies? Marcus asked, leaning in. They're just brothers who survived a fire? That's kind of a letdown. Are you kidding? A girl from the track team countered. It explains everything. That's why Mr. Bakugo is always scanning the room he's looking for exits. And did you see how he stood in front of Midoriya during the assembly? It's totally a protector complex. It's like a real-life drama. I don't know, Adam muttered, looking at his lunch tray. I heard the fire was actually caused by a rival gang, and Bakugo fought them all off to pull Midoriya out of the wreckage. That's why he's so buff. He's been training for the rematch. Mabel sighed, liked her pen, and began to write. The tragic past trope is working better than the secret agent one. Now they aren't just teachers, they're folk heroes. Note, Bakugo hates being pitted. This is going to be hilarious. By lunch, Katsuki had been offered 5 different cups of herbal tea for his nerves and had been told to take a load off by the janitor 3 times. He finally snapped when he found Izuku in the gym, staring at a massive basket of support fruit that had been left on the bleachers. I can't take it, Deku, Katsuki growled, his fiery personality finally bubbling over. I'd rather they think I'm an international assassin than have one more person ask me if I need a hug or a moment to reflect. I'm a disciplinary officer. I'm supposed to be feared, not offered gluten-free muffins. Izuku popped a grape from the basket into his mouth, looking sheepish. At least the fruit is good? But yeah, the librarian tried to give me a book on healing the inner child during my break. I think we might have overshot the tragedy, Kaken. Katsuki paced the length of the gym floor, his heavy boots echoing. Basically brothers, you said? The tragic fire, you said? Now I can't even tell a kid to get off his phone without them thinking I'm having a trauma-induced flashback. Izuku let out a snort, which turned into a full-blown laugh. Look on the bright side. At least nobody thinks we're time travelers anymore. I'd take the time travelers. Katsuki yelled, though he was fighting back a smirk. At least then they'd be impressed. Now I'm just poor Mr. Bakugo, the grumpy guardian. He looked at Izuku, who was still giggling, and his expression softened into that rare, supportive warmth. He reached out and snatched an apple from the basket, taking a loud, aggressive bite. Fine, Katsuki grunted. We'll play the part, but if someone brings me healing crystals, I'm quitting. The gym was empty, the late afternoon sun casting long, orange rectangles across the polished wood. Izuku and Katsuki stood by the equipment locker, the silence of the school building feeling strange after a week of chaotic rumors and support fruit baskets. So, Izuku started, leaning against the metal mesh of the locker. Mabel said she finished the story. She wrote the ending, she closed the book, and nothing. We're still here, Kaken. Katsuki looked up at the ceiling, his hands deep in his pockets. He didn't look angry, just contemplative. I figured as much. Magic books and author kids are fine for a start, but reality usually has a thicker wall than that. We aren't going to blink out of existence just because she wrote the end. Does that bother you? Izuku asked softly. Being stuck here for a while longer? Katsuki looked at Izuku, seeing the way his friend's shoulders had dropped an inch or two since they arrived. The frantic, desperate energy of the war was fading, replaced by something slower. I'm not exactly itching to go back to a battlefield, Deku, Katsuki grunted, a small, fiery smirk crossing his face. And besides, this place is so quiet I can actually hear myself think. It's annoying, but it's not the worst thing. Izuku smiled, a genuine, bright expression. Then let's take advantage of it. Mabel's headed home to work on brainstorming ideas to get us home. So until she figures something out, we have all the time in the world. Let's do something. No suits, no disciplinary files, and definitely no villains. Why don't we actually go out? As civilians. Katsuki huffed, but he was already heading toward the locker room to change. Fine. But I'm not doing anything stupid like going to a cat cafe. An hour later, they were walking down Blue Valley's main street. To anyone else, it was just a quiet Saturday, but to them, it was a bizarre, peaceful dream. Izuku was dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hands tucked into his pockets. He kept stopping to look at things that were utterly mundane. A teenager struggling to parallel park, a golden retriever sleeping in a shop window, the sound of a distant lawnmower. Kaken, look, Izuku whispered, nodding toward the small town park. Nobody is looking at the sky. They aren't checking for shadows or listening for the sound of collapsing buildings. Katsuki walked beside him, his posture surprisingly relaxed. Usually his rested state was one of high alert, a coiled spring ready to explode, but here, the air felt different. There was no impending doom to anticipate. It's weird, Katsuki admitted, his voice low and calm. It's quiet. Not quiet before a fight, but boring. In a good way. They passed a small, local bakery, the smell of fresh bread and sugar spilling out onto the sidewalk. Katsuki stopped, his nose wrinkling. Is that cinnamon? He asked. Probably, Izuku laughed, nudging him. Want to go in? We don't have a mission. We don't have a schedule. We could stay in there for an hour and the world wouldn't end. Katsuki looked at the shop, then back at the street. He looked at Izuku, seeing the scars on his friend's face, scars that, for the first time in years, weren't being treated as tactical data points, but just part of a man taking a walk on a Saturday. Sure, Katsuki said, his voice dropping into that supportive, steady tone he'd adopted since they arrived. He reached out and gave Izuku's shoulder a firm, grounding pat. Let's see if this world's food is as soft as its people. They walked into the shop, the bell over the door chiming a light, cheery sound. For a moment, the mission to get home didn't feel like a desperate race against time. It was just a distant thought. For the first time in their lives, they were allowed to be exactly what they were pretending to be. Just two guys, taking a breath. The bell above the door gave a cheerful ting as Izuku and Katsuki stepped into the rolling pin. The shop was small, smelling intensely of yeast, powdered sugar, and a hint of vanilla. Behind the counter was an elderly woman named Mrs. Higgins, who was currently squinting through thick glasses at a tray of scones. She looked up as the two men entered and immediately froze. Her eyes traveled from Izuku's scarred arms up to Katsuki's towering, broad-shouldered frame. "Oh my," she whispered, her hands fluttering to her apron. Are you the ones? The boys from the Great Fire?" Katsuki's eye twitched. He looked at Izuku, who was already fighting back a grin. "We're the gym teachers from the high school, ma'am," Izuku said, his voice light and friendly. "I knew it," Mrs. Higgins chirped, her fear instantly turning into grandmotherly fussing. Such brave, strong boys. And look at you, dear. She pointed a flowered finger at Katsuki. Protecting your brother after such a tragedy. You must be famished. Heroes don't pay for carbs in this shop. I'm not a hero, I'm a disciplinary officer, Katsuki grunted, though his scary voice didn't work on Mrs. Higgins at all. And we can pay for our own bread. Nonsense. She reached into a display case and pulled out 2 massive cinnamon rolls, drizzled heavily with frosting. You're both far too tense. Especially the tall one. You look like you're ready to punch a muffin. Izuku burst out laughing as Mrs. Higgins shoved a white paper bag into Katsuki's hand. I told you the brother story was going to be a problem, Kaken, Izuku whispered as they were ushered out of the shop by the tiny woman. Katsuki looked down at the bag of free pastries, his face a complicated mask of annoyance and secret satisfaction. Whatever. At least the cinnamon smells better than the locker room. Let's go before she tries to knit us matching sweaters. They walked a few blocks over to the local park. It was just a wide expanse of green grass and a duck pond. They found a quiet bench and sat down, opening the bag of free cinnamon rolls. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just watched the way the wind moved through the leaves. There were no sirens. No news helicopters. No rebuilding projects to oversee. It's so different, Izuku said eventually, breaking the silence. He leaned back, looking up at the clear blue sky. Back home, even after the war ended, there was always so much to do. So many people to help, so much to fix. I don't think I ever actually sat on a bench and just. Saturday. Katsuki finished his pastry and looked at the pond. Back home, even when we won, the air always felt heavy. Like we were just waiting for the next disaster. Here, the biggest disaster is a broken basketball hoop. He looked over at Izuku. The sunlight hit the green of Izuku's eyes, highlighting the scars that while healed still told the story of what they'd been through. In our world, we're the winners of a war, Katsuki said, his voice unusually soft. But here we're just the guys who survived a fire. Nobody is looking at us to see how a hero is supposed to act. They just want us to show up to work on Monday. Izuku nodded, a small, genuine smirk appearing on his face. He nudged Izuku's shoulder with his own, a firm, supportive gesture. It's boring as hell, Izu. But after everything, boring is a pretty good reward. Izuku smiled, closing his eyes and feeling the warmth of the sun. Yeah. It really is, Kaken. Ah, come on, Mr. Bakugo. I can't do detention today. I have plans. Katsuki shrugged his broad shoulders, his expression unmoved. Well, I guess you should have thought about that before you turned the bathroom stall into your personal canvas. Ben, usually one of the quiet, hard-working students, looked like he was at his wit's end. Aside from a habit of doodling on his desk during lectures, he never got into trouble. He stood there, jaw set and fists clenched, desperately searching for a way out. What if I could beat you in a challenge? Ben blurted out. If I win, would you let the detention go? Katsuki leered back, letting out a sharp, sarcastic bark of a laugh. Even if I did agree to that, kid, you wouldn't stand a chance. I don't lose. Ben didn't flinch. He looked the disciplinary officer right in the eye. I think I could beat you. Katsuki paused, looking him up and down with a measuring gaze. A small, competitive spark lit up his crimson eyes. You know what? I'll humor you. If you can beat me, I'll let you off the hook. I'll even let you pick the game. It won't make a difference in the end, but let's see what you've got. Ben's mind raced for a moment before his face lit up. I've got it. In the cafeteria, the lunch ladies have these bottles of hot sauce. They were a special request, but they ended up being way too much for anyone to actually use, so they've just been sitting there. I'm the spice champion of my neighborhood. First person to tap out loses. Katsuki smirked. Spice challenge? I eat fire for breakfast. The walk to the cafeteria gathered a crowd faster than a fire drill. Izuku and about 15 other students trailed behind them, buzzing with a mix of excitement and disbelief. I hope you're ready to get absolutely destroyed, Ben said, his confidence boiling over as they reached the tables. Katsuki didn't bother bragging. He didn't need to. He sat down with a calm, predatory grace. Izuku leaned against the table beside him, offering a sympathetic smile to the poor boy across from them. "Go easy on him, Kaken," Izuku whispered. "No way, Aizu," Katsuki muttered back, his voice low and focused. "I'm taking this extra down." Izuku just shook his head, a small laugh escaping him at the sheer absurdity of it all. 5 hot sauce bottles were lined up on the table, each one looking more ominous than the last. 5 plastic sporks were laid out like dueling swords. Round 1. They both took a full spoonful of a bright red sauce. Neither of them so much as blinked. Ben clapped his hands together, grinning. "Easy peasy. You're going down." Katsuki just smirked, pouring the next round. "Sure, kid. Let's see how you feel about that when you're sitting in detention with a burning tongue." Round 2, a darker, pepper-flecked blend. The students in the background began to cheer. "You got this, Ben. Push through it. This old man has nothing on you." Katsuki picked up the bottle, admiring the label, a cartoon pepper dancing in flames. "Wow, this one's actually got some flavor." To the shock of the onlookers, Katsuki poured a second spoonful and ate it like it was plain ketchup. Round 3, the heat started to climb. Ben took the spoon, and within seconds, his nose began to drip. A flush of heat crept up his neck, turning his face a noticeable shade of pink. "I think Benny Boy is about to tap out." Katsuki sneered, though his eyes held a hint of amusement. Ben shook his head, narrowing his eyes in pure determination. "Never." Katsuki shrugged. "Suit yourself. But don't blame me for what happens next." Round 4, Katsuki took his spoonful, his eyebrows shooting up as the heat finally registered. He turned to Izuku, his eyes bright. "Wow, this one is actually spicy. I love it." Across the table, the situation was grimmer. Ben was doubled over, his forehead resting near the table as he fought the fire in his throat. The brown-haired boy finally hit his limit. "That's it. I give. Get me water." He scrambled for his backpack, pulling out a water bottle and chugging it until it was bone dry. Katsuki threw his hands up in a rare display of triumph. "Yes, I won." The crowd groaned in unison. "Come on, Ben. You almost had him." Round 5. Despite the win, Katsuki's eyes drifted to the final bottle wrapped in a black plastic sleeve with a skull on it. "Ghost pepper? Ooh." Izuku's face dropped. "Kaken, don't you dare." Without a second of hesitation, Katsuki tipped the bottle, filled his spoon, and popped it into his mouth. The students gasped. For a moment, Katsuki went dead silent. His eyes began to water, and a single bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "Whoa. Now that's the heat I'm talking about." Katsuki let out a sharp breath, his voice slightly raspy. That's some good hot sauce." The students erupted into laughter and cheers for the new spice champion, even as Ben suffered quietly in the corner. Katsuki stood up, walked over to the boy, and gave him a firm, surprisingly gentle pat on the shoulder. The next day. It was the middle of algebra when the intercom crackled to life. "Ben Sharp, please report to the disciplinary office." Ben froze. The student next to him whispered, "Dude, what did you do now?" "I don't know." Ben squeaked, looking terrified. "I went to detention last night. I swear." He walked through the halls with his heart in his throat, certain he was in major trouble. He knocked on the heavy office door and stepped inside. "Hello, sir. You wanted to see me?" Katsuki didn't look up from his computer at first. He simply pointed to the chair across from his desk. Ben sat, fidgeting with his sleeves. "I'm sorry, sir. Did I do something wrong?" Finally, Katsuki looked up. "I wanted to talk to you about yesterday." "I'm sorry, I really am." Ben interrupted. "I won't draw on the stalls again." Katsuki let out a small, dry laugh that caught Ben off guard. "Listen, kid. The art you drew in there. It was actually amazing. I can tell you spend a lot of time practicing. I can tell it's something you really care about. But it's still vandalizing." Ben looked down at his shoes, his shoulders slumping. "So," Katsuki continued, "use this instead." He reached under his desk and slid a heavy package across the wood. It was a professional-grade sketchbook with a thick leather cover. Attached to the side was a case filled with high-end colored pencils and markers. Ben stared at it in awe, his mouth hanging open. Mr. Pooh, this is... Katsuki held up a hand, silencing him. Save it. This isn't a gift. It's a lesson. Do not vandalize the school. If you want to create something, do it the right way. Now get back to class. Ben grabbed the book like it was made of gold, leaving the office with a smile that could have rivaled a pro hero's. As the door clicked shut, Katsuki's stern officer mask finally melted. He leaned back in his chair, a soft, genuine smile touching his lips as a warm sensation filled his chest. He might look like a tiger on the outside, but underneath the fire was a man who lived to see talent grow. There was another soft knock on the door a moment later. Katsuki instantly straightened his spine, pulling the mask of the stern, unyielding disciplinary officer back into place. The door creaked open, but instead of a nervous student, a mop of messy green hair poked through the crack. Katsuki felt the tension drain from his shoulders, his posture relaxing as he realized who it was. Izuku stepped into the office, a smile stretching from ear to ear. I saw that, Kaken. Katsuki's face flushed a subtle shade of pink. He looked back at his computer screen, typing a series of nonsense keys just to look busy. What? I was teaching him a lesson. A bone-chilling lesson. Izuku laughed, pressing a hand over his mouth to muffle the sound. Yeah, right. A lesson that encouraged a child to keep pursuing his passion by handing him a $100 professional sketchbook. Katsuki threw his hands in the air, leaning back in his chair with an aggressive huff. What? I didn't want to get him some shitty one. He'd just run out of pages and start drawing on the walls again like a toddler. He looked away, his gaze falling on the drawer where he kept his meager savings from his new job. Plus, I just got paid. When we finally get sent back home, it's not like this world's money is going to be worth anything anyway. Might as well spend it on something that isn't a total waste. Izuku didn't budge, his expression softening as he looked at his friend. He knew exactly what that lesson meant, regardless of the excuses. With one last wink, he finally turned to leave. See you at lunch, Kaken. Katsuki waited until the door fully closed before letting out a huff. Stupid Deku. He hovered over his keyboard, but the smile stayed on his face for the rest of the afternoon. The gym was buzzing with an energy that felt different from the usual school spirit. Today wasn't about grades or the upcoming finals, it was the final Friday tournament. The rules were simple, Team Deku versus Team Bakugo. The student body was split down the middle, each side staring competitively across the court, eyes locked on their rivals with newfound intensity. The whistle blew, and the war began. A wave of students charged toward the center line, sneakers screeching against the polished wood as they scrambled for the colored foam ball. Instantly, a beautiful chaos ensued. Foam blurred through the air like projectiles, and students were being tagged out left and right. Come on, guys. Keep your heads up. Izuku cheered, his voice full of genuine encouragement as he ducked a stray ball. Finish them off. Don't give him an inch. Katsuki roared from the other side, encouraging his team in the only way he knew how. Across the frantic scramble of the game, Katsuki's eyes locked onto Izuku's. It was a look they had shared 1,000 times before, a silent challenge that screamed you versus me. No excuses, no holding back, just the game. The two pros had sparred in high-stakes battles before, but never like this. Here, the weight of the world was gone, replaced by the simple thrill of the court. Bright, honest smiles remained fixed on their faces the entire time. Izuku launched a ball with a snap of his wrist. Katsuki barely pivoted in time, the wind from the ball whistling past his ear. He smirked, that familiar, unhinged glint returning to his eyes, and immediately returned fire. The ball missed Izuku's shoulder by a literal hair. As the minutes ticked by, the chaos thinned out until the only two people left on the court were the team captains. The gym went electric. A heavy silence fell over the court as the two stood their ground, each clutching a ball. They exchanged a single look, both knowing that the first person to strike would decide the match. From the sidelines, the students were screaming themselves hoarse. Go, Mr. Midoriya. You got this, Mr. Bakugo. In the heat of the moment, Izuku's competitive drive momentarily clouded his better judgment. Driven by a sudden surge of adrenaline, he reached deep, activating just 1% of one for all at the very last second. To the human eye, the throw looked normal, but the ball hurtled toward Katsuki with impossible velocity. It struck Katsuki square in the center of his chest. Thinking he had clinched the win, Izuku let out a triumphant laugh and turned to the crowd to cheer. But he had forgotten one thing: Katsuki Bakugo never lost. Despite the force of the hit, Katsuki's hands had clamped down on the foam. He hadn't just been hit, he'd made the catch. Before Izuku could even process the mistake, Katsuki launched the ball back. It caught Izuku right on the hip, the impact snapping him back to reality. The gym went absolutely nuts, the roar of the students shaking the very rafters as Team Bakugo swarmed the court in a victory riot. The evening air was crisp and still as a small group of students gathered on the school's football field. Ben was there, holding a massive, hand-painted kite he had worked on for weeks. It was a masterpiece of silk and light wood, shaped like a soaring dragon. Okay, get ready," Ben shouted, sprinting across the grass. Izuku and Katsuki stood by the bleachers, watching with relaxed smiles. But as the kite caught air, a sudden, freak gust of wind slammed into the field. The string, stressed by the tension, snapped with a sound like a pistol shot. "No!" Ben cried out. The dragon kite didn't just fall. The wind carried it upward, tumbling it through the air until it snagged on the very tip of the stadium's massive floodlight tower nearly 80 feet in the air. It hung there, tangled in the steel rigging, far beyond the reach of any ladder. The students slumped. "It's stuck," Toby whispered, his voice cracking. "We're never getting that down." Izuku looked at the height, then at the heartbroken look on Ben's face. He glanced at Katsuki. There was a silent communication between them, a mutual agreement that their cover didn't matter as much as the smiles of kids they had come to care about. "Kaken," Izuku said softly, his voice dropping into a serious, heroic register. "The students are watching." "Good," Katsuki grunted, his eyes narrowing as he stepped forward. "Let him see what a real pro looks like." The students watched, confused, as Mr. Bakugo took a starting stance, his knees bent deep. Suddenly, the quiet evening was shattered by a deafening boom. Orange light erupted from Katsuki's palms. To the students' absolute awe, he didn't just jump, he launched. He became a human rocket, his explosions echoing like thunder as he blasted himself vertically into the sky. Is he flying?" Marcus screamed. But they weren't done. "I'll stabilize it," Izuku shouted. He didn't use a blast. Instead, his entire body began to glow with a rhythmic, pulsing green light. Veins of emerald electricity flickered across his skin. With a single leap, he shattered the turf beneath his feet, soaring into the air with a speed that left a literal trail of light behind him. 80 feet up, the two moved in perfect synchronicity. Katsuki hovered using rapid-fire bursts, while Izuku extended a glowing, whip-like tendril of dark energy black whip from his hand. The tendril snagged the kite gently, untangling it from the steel. They descended together. Katsuki used his palms to slow his fall, and Izuku landed with the grace of a cat using flow, the green lightning fading from his skin as his feet touched the grass. He walked over to Ben and handed him the kite, completely intact. The field was silent. Every student was frozen, their mouths agape, looking from the scorched grass to the glowing teachers. The gym teachers weren't just athletic, they were gods. Katsuki smirked, crossing his arms. "Don't just stand there with your mouths open, brats. You'll catch flies." The students still stood frozen, wide-eyed and in shock after witnessing the impossible display of speed and fire. But as the crowd began to murmur in the distance, Mabel stepped forward, her notebook clutched tight against her chest. She walked up to the two men, her eyes shining with a clarity they hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking about why you guys are stuck here," she began, her voice small but steady. "And I think I finally know what to do. If I willed you here through sheer imagination and love, then I should be able to send you back home." Katsuki frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. "Then why didn't it work the first time?" When you finished that last chapter, you said you wanted us to go home. It doesn't make sense. Izuku stepped forward, a soft, knowing smile playing on his lips. It's because she didn't truly want us to leave, Kakin. He reached out, placing a hand gently on Mabel's shoulder. As he did, small tears began to track down her face, though she kept smiling. You guys changed my life so much, she whispered, her voice trembling. She pointed at Izuku. You brought so much light. Then she shifted her finger toward Katsuki. And so much spice to this boring old town. I wasn't ready for you to leave yet. The air between them felt heavy, charged with the magic of a girl who had finally found the courage to be selfless. Izuku didn't hesitate. He knelt down and pulled her into a warm, grounding hug. We will always be here for you, Mabel. In this world or another. Katsuki stayed quiet for a moment, his usual sharp edges softening as he looked at the girl who had given them a home when they were lost. He bent down, joining the embrace in his own rough way. We're proud of you, you little sheet. Izuku nudged Katsuki's arm with a small, tearful laugh. They stood back up, Izuku placing a hand on his best friend's shoulder, their silhouettes standing tall against the darkening sky. Mabel sat back in the grass and opened her notebook to the final, blank page. She began to write not out of obligation or fear, but as freely as she ever had. She poured every ounce of her gratitude into the ink, crafting the perfect ending for the heroes who had become her brothers. When she finally looked back up, expecting to see them standing over her, her heart skipped a beat. The space was empty. There was no flash of light, no crack of thunder, and no portal. They were simply gone, vanished as if they had never been there at all. Mabel sat in the grass, the silence of the evening rushing back in to fill the space where her friends had been. She looked at the spot where they had stood just seconds ago, her heart heavy, but strangely peaceful. As she watched, the shimmering purple dust didn't simply vanish into the breeze. Instead, it lingered in the air, swirling gently in a slow, graceful descent. Like a final, silent goodbye, the glowing particles floated down, settling softly onto her messy hair and dusting the open pages of her notebook. As the light touched the ink of her final chapter, the words seemed to hum with a faint, magical warmth. It was a blessing, a lingering spark of their power and their gratitude, meant to stay with her long after the story had ended. Mabel reached up, touching a glowing speck on her sleeve. She wiped away her last tear and smiled. They were home now, but because of them, her world would never feel boring again. 6 months passed. Izuku stood in the familiar, sun-drenched classroom of UA High. He was no longer a gym teacher in a small town. He once again was the #1 hero, standing before his promising Hero Corps students. 1 second, he was mid-lecture, explaining the importance of situational awareness. The next, the atmosphere in the room shifted, shimmering with a familiar, nostalgic warmth. Izuku paused, sensing the change before he saw it. He turned his head to the side just as a teenage girl with a messy ponytail and a well-worn notebook appeared out of thin air. She waved her hand frantically, a massive grin on her face. "Hi, Mr. Midoriya," she chirped in English. The entire class of 1A froze, their mouths hanging open as they stared at the intruder. Izuku, however, just sighed, though his eyes were dancing with fond amusement. "Come on, Mabel," he said, trying and failing to sound stern. "What did we talk about? Once a month. That was the deal." Mabel giggled, hugging her glowing notebook to her chest. "But it is my first visit this month." Izuku laughed, shaking his head. "No, it's not. This is the 5th time you've popped in. When I said, we will always be here for you, in this world or another, I didn't mean you could literally jump universes whenever you needed help with math homework just because you had the power to. I didn't even know you would be able to do this." She laughed even harder, already starting to fade at the edges as her concentration wavered. "That's okay. If you're gonna be a bore about it, I'll just go bother Mr. Bakugo for a while. I bet he has some new hot sauces for me to try." With a playful wink, she vanished. There was no explosion, just a gentle swirl of shimmering purple dust that settled over Izuku's lesson plan. The classroom remained deathly silent for 3 full seconds before Emmy in the front row shot her hand into the air, her face pale with confusion. Who the heck was that? Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose, a small, private smile tugging at his lips as he looked at the purple glitter on his desk. It's a long story, Emmy, he whispered. A very long story,